Hello and welcome to Cypherpunk Bitstream 0x04. This is Smuggler talking out of the TAZ0 in Berlin, and with me is
Frank Braun.
So what's our topic today, Frank?
Today we're going to talk about Dropgangs, and I'm really excited. I think it's going to be an awesome topic. And since you wrote a paper on it called Dropgangs or the Future of Darknet Markets, which was quite a hit, I believe, why don't you tell us what are Dropgangs?
I indeed wrote an article about it, not a paper. And I have to admit, I never expected people to be actually interested in it, because it's a pet peeve of mine. And so what is a Dropgang? Dropgangs are organizations that distribute contraband by using mostly messenger services, often cryptocurrencies, and date drops. So examples for that, it's of course the famous drug dealers that you can text on Telegram, agree on a product to buy and a price. You send the money and they give you a location where you can pick up the product.
So what happened to the darknet markets? I thought people would buy drugs on darknet markets.
Well, of course they buy drugs on darknet markets, but darknet markets are not necessarily a uniform scene that works the same way everywhere. And it's not the end of development when it comes to the distribution of contraband. Of course, you have darknet markets. One of the tendencies of darknet markets is that they appear, they're used, and then they go away. And in between, you have a lot of people that are arrested. And while that is one aspect of the digitalized / crypto-anarchistic contraband black market scene, the other end of the spectrum is something you have predominantly in Eastern Europe. At least that's where I know it from. In Russia and Ukraine, Belarus, Poland to a certain degree, Balkan nations. There, the darknet markets have, to a certain degree, evolved. I mean, they've always been a little bit different than in the Western world. You know, in the Western world, we have this strictly focused on a website where you have the product, you order the product like on eBay, and you have communication with the vendor, give him an address basically where to send the shipment. Then you hope that the shipment shows up. In a lot of Eastern European countries, that was never the dominant model. So what happened, especially in Russia and especially in the bigger cities in Russia, is that people relatively early started to use dead drops instead of the postal system.
Yeah, for what I know, the reason is that the postal system never worked reliably in the first place. You couldn't really send drugs or any contraband through the postal system and expect it to arrive at the destination.
Right. That is a big factor for that. The big factor is that the postal system doesn't work well enough. The other factor is that getting caught with drugs possession in a lot of those countries is something you don't get out of. You know, you can't deny it. You know, you're caught. Well, basically, you get a letter, drugs are in there, you get caught with that. And you're pretty doomed. You don't want to go into a Russian prison. You know, Russian prisons are really not nice. And the Russian police is known for a very heavy hand when it comes to dealing with drug dealers. And the risk of using the postal system in Russia is relatively high, and especially also the awareness of that there's a high risk. There's a difference between how high the risk really is and how much people believe in that risk. And I think that in Russia you had additional two factors coming in. That is, number one, a lot of people were aware that they are living in a surveillance state to a certain degree. So they wouldn't trust the postal system on not just working, but also not leaving traces. That's one thing. The other thing is that a lot of people, due to the history of Russia, have some experience with physical tradecraft. And it's not an unknown mechanism for them. They've used it before. And that is specifically true for organized crime. So a lot of organized crime actors in Russia have a history of working in the surrounding of the intelligence services. Let's speak it like that. And for them, a lot of those methods were much more familiar than they're for people in the West. And another aspect, I think, is that a lot of the contraband business in a lot of Eastern European states and Russia is much more localized. So we're not talking about a dealer that supplies all of Russia, but it's more, you have organizations that basically only deal with Moscow or St. Petersburg or whatever. So there is a closer connection geographically between supply and demand.
Yeah, and what you said about the demand side, I think you're right, at least from anecdotal evidence. I know that people in Germany, they have more of the feeling that if they get caught, they can just deny it.
Exactly.
And which is true to some extent. I mean, everybody can send you a letter, and okay, if you receive the letter, if you actually take the letter and not report it, it's kind of fishy, but the crime or the punishment you can expect for consumer amounts is relatively low, and police probably doesn't even prosecute it by going to your place. They usually would send you a letter as well and say, we found the shipment. And
yeah, though in the last 1 or 2 years, that has changed a little bit. So number one is there are more and more letters not arriving. And the second thing is that police usually doesn't go after you with only one single thing. It's not like they find the letter, and that's all they use in court against you. Quite the contrary. So they would use the letter to get probable cause to be able to search your place, for example, or to get a drug test, and that's two kinds of evidence that you have then. And that's something you don't get out of easily, So the interception of the letter is just the first step, basically. Sure. And it kind of depends on where it happens to you, even in Germany. I mean, in Berlin, if you mail order a few pills of ecstasy, nothing's going to happen to you, if you are caught once. If you're caught like 10 times, it might get costly, but you're not likely to go to jail. If it's bigger amounts, then, it's very different. But same amounts, same frequency in southern Germany, Bavaria, for example, is very likely going to mean that you're going to see a judge and that you're going to be convicted and punished for it.
Sure, they have more manpower and stricter enforcement of rules, even stricter rules. So
exactly, they have stricter enforcement rules. So the law is basically the same, but there's like this political influence that exists on what the police focuses on. And in Berlin, drug crime is, at least consumer crime, is not a higher priority. I mean, if it were, Berlin would be empty probably. You know? In Bavaria, it's a whole different thing. You know, they're much more stringent and conservative.
But to go back to the drop gangs, I saw this in, I think it was Ukraine. I saw a few different channel names, probably Telegram channels, you know, hashtag and some obviously drug related, channel name sprayed onto walls.
Yes.
Basically as, guerrilla marketing, so to say. So just like hypothetically, if I would be now wanted to buy drugs over such a channel or whatever they're selling, it seemed like they were selling drugs because of the name. How would the process work? What would I have to do?
Okay, so it's important to recap that for Dropgangs, there are two distinguishing or special features that a Dropgang has. Number one is they predominantly use messengers for communication. And the second thing is using dead drops. And we'll get into the dead drop as well, but when it comes to communication, there are basically three ways in how to contact those gangs or dealers. In a lot of Eastern European smaller towns, they actually have marketing as graffitis, basically. You know, they tag walls and stuff like that. And then you have something like at Magic Chop or whatever, you know. And
that's a channel or
it's a Telegram. Person? It's usually a Telegram channel.
Yeah.
Or a Viber channel. That's relatively, there's relatively high use of Viber for some reason, for this as well, especially in the Balkans and Ukraine. And you basically just join that. You know, you text that.
It's open, so I only need the name of the channel.
Yes, you basically only need the name of the channel. A lot of those channels are bot operated. So, you'll get a greeting, basically, that tells you how to continue. And
so once I join, the greeting
it's usually not on joining, but you say hello or whatever. Yeah. You know, it's usually triggered by content. And then you get a response back that is, you know, hey, nice that you're here. You know, we're selling this, and this. That is basically. And then it often tells you even how to communicate with a bot. You know, not all of those bots are well programmed. You know, there's no natural language processing, whatever. It's much more like early IRC bots were. You know, you kind of had to speak the language. And then you would enter something like buy 2 grams cocaine.
But wouldn't that mean that all the other people in the channel could see this as well?
Yes, that is exactly what's happening.
Okay.
So you usually have the buy offer, the buy request is often in the public, and then nothing happens. And then you get a private message back.
Okay.
And that private message usually says, okay, we want this kind of payment. And as soon as you paid, you usually get a photo and a link to Google Maps, actually.
And the payment would be cryptocurrencies, usually?
Not necessarily. There is, of course, cryptocurrencies. There is a lot of prepaid card payments. So they would tell you, we want Google Pay, for example, is a thing that is quite common. And you basically go to a shopping mall or to a gas station, whatever. You get the prepaid thing, you scratch it off, you send the loading code, and then that is the payment. Cryptocurrencies is a thing. I'm not sure if it's dominant, because I have seen a lot of other payment systems being offered. So there's a lot of prepaid cards. There's often the scratch of credit cards. That is quite common.
Also these low amount prepaid cards.
Exactly. PaySafe card is relatively common in Central European environments. Yeah, that is basically it.
Do you know how they can actually use things like Google Pay cards? Because as far as I know, you cannot convert it back into currency.
That's not completely true. A lot of the stuff is used to buy stuff that they sell. So what you have a money laundering operation on the other side. So it basically means
they buy their own apps, basically, or
exactly they buy their own apps or their own ads or books or movies or whatever, and they're whole providers for this kind of getting money. You know, you basically order that service on the darknet, you get an API for it, and then you send whatever $10 in, and you get 5 out. You know, stuff like that. It's not necessarily cheap.
But then they have a legitimate reason for why they get a wire transfer.
Exactly.
Because with cryptos, they have the problem. It's not easy to revert it back into cash if you received it
exactly. So
illegally.
The money usually goes to a company that is owned by the same structure that is selling a legitimate product. And they do that for a few months, and then they close down the company and open another one, get new accounts, etc., and then start the whole process over.
And since Google, Apple, Amazon, whoever is issuing these cards, they make a big cut out of it. They're also not very motivated to crack down on it.
Yeah. Plus, the providers for these services are usually not cheap. They take another 10% out of it.
These API providers, basically, that do that for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of like money laundering for the 21st century in a way.
Yes.
Like with an API.
Exactly. Yeah. It's API money laundering. Yeah. And it's originally it comes from the cybercrime world. A lot of the organizations there are like carding organizations, etc., where you have this division of labor.
Carding means stolen credit cards.
Stolen credit cards. And in carding, you have the same thing. You have people that get the cards. You have people like steal the cards. You have people that validate the cards. Then you have a trade in those cards. And then you have people that get the money off the cards and provide the service of transferring it to you in a more or less legal way. And everybody takes a cut.
Do you know, for the cryptocurrencies, what are the dominant ones?
Bitcoin is the biggest one by far. There's some Monero, and I've seen nothing else actually.
Okay, so basically Bitcoin because it's the biggest one, and Monero because it has better privacy. Yeah.
I mean, there's a limited basis of data I'm operating on because most of my experience in that field is by talking to people that work in the field. That are either users or providers, and a few very limited test buys. So I don't have a complete view on the market. You know, it's anecdotal, you know. I think there are like, I don't know, 50, 60 cases that I actually know about. And from that basis, the wide dominant payment system in the cryptocurrency sphere is Bitcoin.
Well, I think we might be able to extrapolate a little bit from the darknet markets, and there you can see it as well. It is usually Bitcoin and maybe Monero.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not even sure if I have seen Zcash advertised anywhere.
Yeah, I have.
But it's basically you either take the biggest one or you go on the privacy coins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that the graffiti marketing is not the only way they market themselves. So another thing that is more common in like Slovakia, Czech Republic, Germany is invites. So instead of having a public tag somewhere, it's either a darknet market dealer or a street dealer that gets you an invite to one of those channels.
So it's a bit like word of mouth referrals.
Yes. Yes.
Is it also customers inviting each other or some?
I've never seen that. So the only thing that I've seen so far is that you bought from another dealer or through another channel, And then after second, third buy from that person, you get an invite.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it in the article as well, that a big problem for merchants on darknet markets was that when the darknet market goes down, which they often did, I mean, they've been, they had exit scams, they've been taken down by law enforcement, things like that.
Run by law enforcement, which is really bad.
Yeah, that the merchants, they lose their customers, or they lose a way to contact them. So
and the reputation data for them.
Yeah. Yes. So they have, especially over time, because they learned, they have an incentive to create their independent communication channels.
Yeah.
So, and that's why it makes total sense. And obviously, they also wanted to cut out the
middleman.
Yeah, the fees for the markets, which I believe were quite high.
Yeah, but I don't think they were high enough to justify setting up their own infrastructure.
No. So it was more to continue the operation.
Yeah. The invites it's an interesting thing because there are quite different ways you can get such an invite, you know? So most likely people that buy bigger amounts get invites to Dropgang organizations. If you're a small buyer, I'm not sure how often it happens. Like if you buy, I don't know, once a year, you know, no dealer is going to care about that. But if you're a regular customer, especially if you're buying for your friends, that is something they're looking out for.
Sure, they want continuous customers where they can continuously sell to trusted customers.
Exactly.
So they don't have the trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. And you also have multiple channels there. So it's not necessarily that everybody is invited into a Telegram channel or into the same Telegram channel. But sometimes the providers or the dealers have multiple channels or multiple identities on the messenger and often share that only with very few clients. And it's mostly automated. I mean, there's software where you can automate most of that process. You know, basically they have customer relationship management. And most of that software actually, interestingly, comes from the cybercrime markets. It's the same customer relationship software that is used for ransomware networks. So in a way, they buy most of their tech that is offered on the darknet for cybercrime. They buy the same tech and run it for non-cybercrime operations. It's quite fascinating how developed and user-friendly a lot of that software is. And
it kind of spilled over into the physical world. Using dead drops was basically the missing piece. And
yes. And there also appears to be a lot of interlink between people that are playing both on the cyber and on the dark side. So especially in Eastern Europe, there seem to be people that I'm not sure if the word consultant is correct, but people that are tech savvy and that basically work for multiple providers in the organized crime field. So they're not just in the cybercrime, but they're also helping people setting up secure communication, or they help ransomware people, and so on and so on. So it's maybe call it business consultant. You know, that I'm not completely sure how it works, you know, organizationally, but that is the impression. There's a lot of knowledge that is traveling in that whole field, you know, specifically in that geography.
And is it just drugs or predominantly drugs? Do you know any other goods that are sold through this system?
There are rumors of that you can get weapons and stuff. Like weapons, it's not like machine guns or something. You know, it's mostly like cheap pistols. But I've never seen that. You know, I've only heard rumors. Ammunition you can buy, but almost nobody does that. You know, and there's enough ammunition market that you don't have to go.
And these countries not that hard to buy.
It's trivial,
Yeah.
you kind of find it on the street often. But drugs is the predominant thing, plus some medication. So there are a few medical drugs that are not available in some of those countries or very expensive. And they're really hard to import.
Because of regulations.
Mostly because of corruption. So it's mostly a corruption thing. So if you're crossing the border and you have a medical drug that is really important for your child to survive, and it's really expensive. That means for the corrupt border officer that there's a lot of money to extract from you.
Mm.
So that is the reason why some of those medications actually end up mostly being traded on the black market, because people more or less specialize on smuggling it and optimizing the bribery.
Mm-hmm.
So to make the product cheaper and more reliable.
It's better to bribe a big chunk and import a container than
exactly. It's more
bribe
efficient.
every single package.
Exactly.
Bribe for every single package. Okay, so I now hypothetically ordered on this channel. They told me a payment method. I paid them, and now I get a picture, you said?
Yeah, usually you get a picture or a series of pictures, and very often you get a Google Maps link. And sometimes they give you longitude and latitude, but most of the case it's just a Google Maps link, sometimes a little text that says, okay, in the park, whatever, bench, whatever, go to the left, then after the third tree or whatever, very short descriptions. And usually a description of the container. So the product is not, just placed in the open, of course, but it's in a container. And the container usually is a throwaway object that is relatively natural for the environment. It's sometimes, very seldomly, it's like fake stones, but most often it's just trash. It's like a black bag, where there's some trash in there actually, and then there's the product on the bottom,
Crumbled cigarette package.
or cans, or sometimes even bottles. So you have this container, and that is the standard low quantity dead drop method. So you usually have that only to a certain value of product. And the moment the value goes up, it becomes a little bit more elaborate. But the standard method for low volume is that.
And they are on the open, or?
They're usually on the open. Sometimes, especially in Russia, for some reason, I'm not too sure, there's often that it's slightly buried. So it's just, like a centimeter under the topsoil, you have this, you can basically scratch it open with your foot, and then it's there. That for some reason, that's a common method in Russia. I don't actually know why. But I think it has to do with, people specifically searching for trash. So I think that is the reason.
Yeah, I see. And do you know what the overall time is? So from I join the channel, I order, I pay until I get the location.
First, buying, if you have everything, if you know what they're going to ask for as payment and stuff like that, 5 minutes maybe.
And then I get immediately location.
Yes.
So they have it, have the goods pre-deposited.
Yes, the goods are pre-deposited.
Okay, so it's not that somebody has to put it there first.
Well, that exists as well. If you're buying a quantity or a product, whatever, that is rare,
sure,
then of course that happens.
But if I just buy a regular dose of my favorite drug, then it's
yeah. It also depends a little bit on what location you are. So there are a few. There are gangs that don't have stashes. So they don't stash the product around the city. But what they do is they have a courier that goes close to your location, stashes is there, and then you get a message. And that is basically the higher service version. And that mostly happens in locations where the gang doesn't have a lot of customers and where there's a high competition with other means of exchange.
So they have to go the extra mile, so to say.
Yeah, they go the extra mile, plus they cannot bind that much capital by just having stashes, because the frequency of stash access is too low.
Yeah, I mean, you need a pretty high turnover, and you in order to justify burying this stuff in advance, and you also have a higher risk of losing it if the longer it's there.
Yes. Plus you have the issue that drug users are not necessarily known for being very patient or for being highly focused, you know? So having a dead drop somewhere for too long or for longer times means that your dead drop has to be unsuspicious, which also means that it's harder to find, which is not necessarily something that the dude who just wants his next shot is really happy about. You know, he doesn't want to search for half an hour, you know? He just wants his drugs. So the short-term placements, you know, where you basically say, I'm in the region X, you know, you say a street or whatever that is nearby. And then you have this courier that goes there and spontaneously looks for a dead drop. Not in that street, but, you know, in whatever, 200-meter radius, you know, drops the stuff and goes. And the moment he goes, you get the coordinates and you just go there.
Yeah, but I was just going to ask, so how do I specify where I want the product? So, I mean, if I'm in Berlin, it would be kind of useless to say, okay, it's in Berlin, because then I might end up having to, you know, travel 45 minutes to get there.
So in smaller towns, even smaller cities, you have one channel per city. And the channel basically gives the location. And then it's usually in certain regions. So it's a city center where there are parks or whatever. And sometimes it's on the outskirts towards a certain direction. So in Berlin, for example, a lot of the stuff is located east of Marzahn. You know, that is where a lot of the bigger shipments are happening. Because of, I don't know, actually, you know, but, that is for smaller territories, so to speak. And often when you come to bigger cities, you have like neighborhoods that have their own, you know, channel or whatever. Or you're on the channel and then you say, okay, I want to have the delivery, or I want to have a location that is close by X. You know, of course, you don't tell them your home address, but you say, whatever, street A, corner street B, and then somewhere in the vicinity, the courier will drop the stuff. If you deal with standard products, standard packaging with a high number of clients, the dead drops are pre-positioned though. So pre-positioning is what most of them go after, what they want to do, because the turnover rate is far higher.
So they would have one courier and he drops all the packages, and then they can sell them off.
Exactly. And it's the latter that is actually much more secure, because for the dealer, acting in the physical after being contacted is much riskier than not having to act in the physical, you know, because there could be surveillance or whatever.
Sure. I mean, if I tell them like close to location X, and I have a team of people looking for suspicious behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would like to add one interesting thing.
Yeah.
When it comes to payment, because there are two cases that one of them I know from own experience, the other one is a little bit strange. So payment is sometimes in cash, So even when you have a longer standing relationship with one of those gangs, you sometimes have credit with them. So that means that you go to a dead drop location and you get your product, and then at another location, or sometimes even at the same location, you drop cash.
Although same location would be really bad OPSEC for this.
The same location is really bad OPSEC, and that specific organization has been taken down recently. But that is one of the things that happens. And there's also this thing where in some of those groups, you can vouch for another customer and basically transfer your credit to him. And for some people, that is actually a business. So they become the money man, but they never handle the product. That it's actually quite common in the club scene, etc. It's a barkeeper or whatever that basically receives the money for the gang and extends the credit to some to whatever guy showed up.
I see. So basically, he kind of refers the customers to the gang.
Yes.
Kind of vouches for them.
But only with this credit line he himself has.
Yeah, and
yes.
they order, and he actually collects the money and then kind of pools it and pays them.
Exactly.
Through that drop. That he doesn't necessarily have to know that.
No, sometimes it's just by courier. In that case, it's often by courier. You know, you have somebody who just comes by, says a word, you know, and then you know that it's a courier.
I see. Okay.
So that
but it doesn't mean that the guy referring the other people that he actually knows anyone.
No, he doesn't.
And the courier can also be some guy from the darknet.
Very often is.
Who just then puts it in some dead drop.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Or that is the second story I wanted to mention is moving drops as something that I experienced once in Central European city, where the form of payment was kind of crazy, but worked really well. And that is, I was ordered to stand at a corner and wait for a car with a certain description and throw the money into the open window of the car when it would, slowly pass by me,
Wow.
And I thought this is for sure a Russian gang, because this is like from KGB playbook, and I was really suspicious if that would work, because I was actually thinking, okay, I really don't like being out in the open, and having even that brief contact with somebody, I'm not very happy about that, but, in the end, it was actually worth it. So the intelligence gathered was very good. And I'm not sure how often that happens. It's not a very safe method. I wouldn't suggest it to anybody to use that, but it's been seen in the wild.
I wanted to ask earlier, so, I'm picking up my package, the stuff that I bought, but it means that the seller, he knows the dead drop, so he could surveil me, right?
In theory, he could surveil you, which is exactly the same thing you have with when you receive a letter, with the letter, you basically pick the spot where you have to be surveilled, and with a dead drop, the seller picks that spot. Now, the problem is that in most countries or most locations, the consumer is not the one with the highest risk, but it is the supplier.
Well, it could be a sting operation, right?
Yeah, but the sting operation against the consumer is usually not as effective as the operation against the supplier.
Sure.
So it kind of depends on what the legal situation is. Now, interestingly, the sting operation with letters works just as well, or almost as well, I have to say. So with this attack, you have to make the assumption that whoever is attacking you as a recipient of the shipment is after you for some reason. He wants to put you into jail, whatever. No.
Well, it could be a sting operation where they basically just want to catch people in general. set up the whole thing as a fake.
Absolutely, but you have the same thing if you're using standard mail operations.
Sure,
you know, because when
you even have it with the street corner dealer.
You have it with the street corner dealer as well.
Yeah.
So with using the standard mail operation, you basically only have 3 ways on how to receive it. You know, you have option number 1 is you have it shipped to your own home, which a lot of people do, but which is really unsafe.
Most people do it.
Yes.
It's crazy, but
it's what they do.
It's drug users. They want the drugs.
Exactly. It's drug users. So option number 2 is that you are abusing an existing address. So you have it shipped to your office, or you have it shipped to your neighbor, and you know that your neighbor is not there, and you fish it out of his letterbox or whatever. And option number 3 is you use an unused letterbox in a big project or whatever, where there are unused letterboxes. You break them open, you replace the lock, you put a name tag in, that's it. Now, in all those cases, the spot where you are to be surveilled is a given as well. Same thing as with a dead drop, With a dead drop, the spot is given where they could surveil you. With a letter, it's the same thing. You give them an address where you can be surveilled.
And they could actually set up the surveillance first and then send you the letter.
Of course, they're faster in setting up the surveillance than the letter would ever take. Plus, you have a much better selector. If a shipment goes to that letterbox and you're the one opening the letterbox, there's no way of talking you out of it. You are the intended recipient. And you knew about it and everything. You have the key, etc. Plus,
well, if it's your own letterbox, you could still say, "I just wanted to check my mail."
But then it's drug test, searching home, and so on. So that doesn't really work either. So that is number 1. Number 2 is a lot of times, especially for a smaller product, you don't want to have tracking. Which means that you actually have to check the place more than once. Because there's a window in which the shipment would arrive. Would it arrive today or tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow? So you might have to check, or you will likely check multiple times, because most people just want their product. So instead of waiting for the end of the window, they check every day, which is suspicious and increases your presence at the point, it's confirmation for whoever surveils you. And so in a way, the whole surveillance sting operation part is exactly the same. If the person you're dealing with is law enforcement or wants to rip you off, the only thing they need is a place where they know you will be. That's all they need.
Yeah, and in case of the letter, the risk is actually much higher, because it can also happen that they look at the letter in transit, they find that there is a letter with drugs.
Yes.
And they keep shipping it and then surveil you. With the dead drop,
which is happening all the time.
Yeah.
I've heard that number recently. There are about 600 letters that are captured just in Frankfurt per day. And
at
the international shipping. Yeah. And those are basically the international shipments that come through. And most of the shipments are local, but there are these 600 international. That's likely somewhere around 1% to 2%, 1 to 10% of the total shipments that come in per day. So
you mean of total shipments containing contraband?
Yes.
Yeah, not
containing drugs, to be specific here.
Yeah.
So it's 600 letters with drugs. And a lot of them are just taken out of circulation. Others you record basically where they're going to, and you create databases for, and then you continue shipping. And then when you look at how people are caught, they are caught by taking the letter, by going to the letterbox, etc., or going to the post office. What a lot of people, for some reason, do is they have stuff shipped to an address where it's not received, but actually ends up in the post office, and then they pick it up in the post office, which is considerably stupid.
Where you have to show ID
etc. A lot of people get caught by that because for some reason they don't manage to receive the package when it arrives.
But package, we're talking larger quantities as well.
Yeah, a few kilos, exactly. And then it's like jail forever, So in a way, the threat scenario is the same one. However, with Dropgangs, it really depends also on how big your purchase is and how good of a customer you are and how spread the drop gang is, like how professional they are, because some drop gangs have countermeasures against that. It basically works like this. The drop gang gives you a list of locations that are close to dead drops. And you just go to one of those locations, and then you say, I'm at location A. And they immediately give you the dead drop coordinates. So what that means is they're making you an offer to say, okay, to surveil you and to sting you, we would have to have much more resources, because we would have to wait on all those places or move there fast enough, And we basically give you the advantage, of randomly selecting one of those spots and being there. And then we release that information that allows you to, within 2 minutes, get the product and disappear. 2 minutes that are too short to act on, to go to the place. Plus, it dramatically drives up the cost of surveillance because you would have multiple locations to surveil.
That's a really smart method. I like it. It's some economic security in a way. It's like you're not perfectly secure, but you make an attack more expensive.
Yes,
and that's really cool. Do you know of any other methods how you could protect yourself? I mean, I was thinking maybe you could also send your own courier, hire somebody to pick it up and put it somewhere else.
Well, that is the exact method a lot of richer consumers do. You above a certain importance and risk averseness, you don't buy your own drugs. You have people buy drugs for you. And it's the same thing with dead drops. You send somebody that picks it up for you.
And hand delivers if you know him, or
hand delivers, or what happens from time to time is chains of dead drops. So I'm not so sure how reliable those chains are on the consumer side, though. They're very very common on the supply side. So to actually set up a drop gang, like the more professional drop gangs are hierarchical. They have like an import layer, a distribution layer, and a sales layer and a distribution layer. And they sometimes use like interdiction methods to protect those layers and to protect actors in those layers. So you would have chains of dead drops there sometimes.
Okay, I think we kind of exhausted the methods of how you could protect yourself as a buyer.
Well, there are a few more things, I mean, the location of the dead drop itself is interesting, So you don't want to have a dead drop in a location that is low frequency and hard to have awareness of what's happening around you. So what you usually don't want is a dead drop that is in the middle of the forest. Like you have to drive into the forest and then walk for 1 kilometer That's not a good place, because it restricts your ability to know what's going on, and it singles you out. You have no way of escaping, etc. What's much more reasonable is to have a dead drop next to a road, for example, where you basically stop the car, and then pretend to go pee, and then you kind of already can see, if there are other cars stopping, or slowing down and stuff like that. So that's one thing. Or parks are a good example. And then
it's not suspicious if you sit down on a bench and
exactly. However, it's suspicious if there are people standing around looking in the direction of the dead drop. That's kind of suspicious. Then the time on when you want to pick it up, So, early evening is much better because lower light, etc. We'll talk about localization techniques later and why they're important, but lower light protects you as well, to a certain degree. And then the container is a thing that is of interest. So, are the drugs contained in a very visible and distinct container, or in a container that is common, And one of the things you can do is a false approach. So when you know what kind of container it is in, you can pretend that you picked it up, but continue to walk, and have this container with you, and then you just walk, for 5 minutes. And then if you're stopped, and searched, whatever, then you kind of know that the dead drop was under surveillance. So false approach is one of the methods you can increase your chances of getting away. Another thing that is really smart is to switch off the mobile phone capabilities of your smartphone. Don't leave electronic fingerprints.
At least go into flight mode, and if you do that, do it way before you reach the location.
There are things called offline maps, that help you. So that's another thing. Then when you go there, there's often a good reason to give a surveillant a good reason for you to be there. So dogs, going out with your dog to the park is a good reason to be in the park, and then if you can direct your dog into the direction of the dead drop and then pretend to pick up his poo, that works pretty well, A smoking habit also works very well, So these are things that you can do. There are a few people, especially on the supplier side, like the dealer side, that are really good when it comes to tradecraft. They create dead drops by standing. They don't bow down. But they basically slip the package through their pants, to the ground, and stuff like that. So, you don't really, even if you look at them a little bit, you don't actually see what they're doing, For the customer side, that's of course, a lot to ask, of course, most customers are not good at that, but a few simple rules usually, make it hard to really surveil you.
But yeah, from what we talked about so far, I can see that I think it's very attractive for customers.
Yeah.
In the sense that it's more secure than shipping by mail, and the time preference thing.
The time preference is probably the main argument.
That's the killer thing.
That's the killer thing.
You can have it in a few hours at most.
Yeah, I've never seen any case where it takes more than an hour.
Yeah.
There are quite a few variations of that. If you have a courier that drops it close to your place, that takes a little bit longer, or if there's a low density of stashes, then it takes a little bit longer for you to travel there, etc. But in general, it's far faster than receiving something by letter. Plus, when it comes to the security side, there are two aspects where it's dramatically more secure than using the postal system. Number one is there have been so many cases of dealers being caught and they having a database of all their previous shipments. So that's like a standard thing. It happens all the time, and you have no influence about that. You know, I mean, of course, the dude will say, "Oh yeah, I delete everything immediately after blah 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 blah."
Yeah,
you know? But
we all heard that story.
But even if he does, that's often not enough. You know, if the market is infiltrated, or if they infiltrate his account before he knows it, well, the messages are still there. You know, and then when they take him down, they'll take his PGP key, they decrypt it. You know, it happens so often.
Yeah, and even if you're really good and you go the route and you set up a mailbox, you know, in another building, maybe, you know, drilling some extra mailbox there or taking an abandoned one, you're not going to be able to do that for every single shipment. So you would probably have to reuse this mailbox a couple of times, which increases risks.
Yes.
And with the dead drops, you get in different location every time. So it's much safer.
Exactly. And there's another thing that I think is important to mention is that, I said before, there's a difference between the existing risks and the awareness of risks. And I think that a lot of people really think that the postal system is anonymous, you know, because you go to one of those red or black or blue or yellow boxes where you know, throw in a letter and then it magically appears on the other side, wherever the address is. But most people never really think about how this works in detail. You know, how does the postal system work in detail? And the postal system is usually not very happy to talk about the details either, you know, because there's some shenanigans going on there as well. So I know this whole aspect a little bit, at least for Germany. So in Germany, what happens with your letter is it gets picked up from the specific mailbox, and goes into a numbered container. The numbered container goes into a sorting facility. In the sorting facility, the numbered container is scanned, and then all the mail from it is put into the machine. And the machine does have an interesting feature because it records the complete sender, recipient, and container ID. So all of these mail sorting machines have exactly this feature. And for the recipient address, that's, you know, smart. You know, what you want, you don't want a human reading the address, but you want to OCR it. You know, computer reads the address and then forwards it. But the sender address and the container ID are used as well.
What do you mean by container ID?
So the container ID basically links the mailbox to the letter, because all the letters from a mailbox go into one container. And then the container goes to the sorting facility.
Okay. So the container which contained the letter from a mailbox. So that's how you know if you later want to trace a letter, that it originated from that specific mailbox, was picked up at that specific time. This was the sender, this was the recipient.
Exactly. And then what happens is that, number one, if you have, by accident or whatever, you find a shipment of contraband, one of the things that happens is that they look through they basically flag the container and then try to actually sort out the other letters that were in the container, which is a thing that is completely automatic. Because in every mail distribution center, you basically have the same sorting equipment. So the first sorting equipment is basically saying, okay, I have the letter in the container, and then it's sorted into a code that goes into the direction of the next sorting facility. In the next sorting facility, the same thing happens, etc., and basically down to the post office, where it's often the post offices actually get boxes with pre-sorted letters that are just given to the postman, you know. But the whole process is digitally augmented. And sometimes it's augmented so far that the letters actually get a tracing code printed on it. Something that you don't directly see, because in many places it's done with UV ink. But it's actually, they print a little barcode on your letter that allows them to go to the database record that says it comes from here, it goes to there, you know. It's basically internal tracking. So if they find a letter which is suspicious, they can flag all the other letters from that time, from that container, and automatically sort them out and then check them out. So that is one of the things. The other thing is you can repeat that. And what you get is you get a heat map. You know, this is the time, this is the mailbox something was thrown in, you know, and you do that a lot of time. You get a map with a statistical overlay, which gives you a really good indication of where the sender is actually from, and also gives you good indications on how he operates, you know, timing and so on and so on. And this kind of mail inspection and analysis is quite common. I mean, in the US, there's a special police actually for that. You know, everybody makes fun about that, but they have special units that do nothing else, you know. And the same thing exists in a lot of developed countries. Your mail is, yes, it is anonymous in the sense that you can give a false sender address, but it's really hard to suppress where it's going. And if you are somebody who sends a lot of mail, staying secure against surveillance is really hard, because that is usually how those people are caught. You know, you have too many letters that you put into the same mailboxes, you know?
Yeah, it makes it extremely hard to send larger amounts. I mean, if you put a lot of letters with contraband in one mailbox, you can't really do that. Like you said, once one of these letters is flagged, they would search for all of them. And you can also not really distribute it to mailboxes that are close to each other. So you would, for a city like Berlin, you would have to distribute it over all mailboxes, like randomly and over time, which is extremely time consuming. And that would be the only way to do it properly. And if you're in smaller cities, you simply don't have enough mailboxes to send from. So you would have to drive to other cities, which increases risks again, because then you're driving with a car or with public transport or whatever. Yes. So actually,
and then as soon as the sender is caught, you know, or even if a shipment is caught, you already have a bunch of recipients that are then flagged, you know. So it's not really a good method.
Well, I mean, there's one nice thing about letters is that it offers a good sender anonymity if you have a low frequency of shipping.
Yes.
So that's
exactly. You need a very low frequency of shipping, which allows you to take countermeasures. You know, so you're not using the mailbox next to your office, but on the way to work, you just get out 2, 3, 4 stops later and search for a mailbox there.
And that's something I think that kind of got forgotten over time now that people then they moved into digital, but you know, actually writing stuff in the mail or also sending cash in the mail is a really good method.
Yes. If it's low frequency.
If it's low frequency.
Yes. Sender low frequency. Yeah.
There are some good use cases that are underutilized now.
Yes. I mean, the good example for that is anonymous payment by cash. You know, I mean, the company I work for, we receive cash in mail for payment for our products, you know, and we as Cypherpunk Bitstream are going to do the same thing. By the way, later in the show, we'll give you an address where you can send money or fan mail or whatever. So
no contraband.
No contraband, please. Yeah, no contraband, please. If you want to send us, if you want to send us contraband, use dead drops, please. But so it is still a good method of receiving things from anonymous senders.
Yeah,
if those senders are many and widely dispersed.
Yeah,
you know.
But as a seller, it's really hard to use it correctly.
Exactly.
Should we go a bit on the low level? What would be better methods to localize dead drops?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we can technically augment the process a little bit.
Oh yeah, you can. This is actually what got me interested in the whole thing. Was just tech. You know, I really,
Of course.
I really don't care what they're selling, whatever. I don't care. I
don't know why they're selling powders all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a drug user. I really don't have any use for that. But I like creativity. There's a saying that the street finds a use for everything.
Street finds its way.
The street finds its way, and I find it fascinating when people find new ways of doing shit, and using tech for that. That is like, it makes me happy.
The creativity of a searching drug user is not to be underestimated.
And the creativity of a smart dealer.
Yeah.
Especially when you have this, as I mentioned before, where you have tech specialists from other fields starting to augment new markets. It's a fascinating thing, and I think that's actually, it's one of the things that is really special for our time. I think it's just, in a way, I mean, we had New Year's Eve 2020, just a few days ago, and we had this party, basically, the start of the Cypherpunk era, and this is actually what we're seeing all over again. And now on the street level is that high tech shit, becomes a tool of low life crime,
There's, tech specialists actually helping different organizations there. It's kind of funny. It reminds me of the saying that people learn crime in prison.
Yes.
Because that's, where you network with other prisoners, and then you basically trade the techniques, the tools of the trade. And now that also, they kind of,
it's getting more interesting now, actually, because of, and I think it's mostly due to the methods that come from cybercrime, both organizational methods and communication, etc. Is that over the last, 20 years, a lot of, the tech providers came into being. Mostly for stuff like skimming, credit card skimming, payment card skimming. And they built their own supply chains for technology, etc.
Just to clarify for the listeners, so skimming means you kind of copy the card when you slip it into an ATM, for example, when there's a fake reader on top of the actual reader that copies the card.
So there has been multiple iterations or generations of skimming hardware. It started from relatively off-the-shelf, bulky stuff to homemade stuff to now having professional electronics companies creating that hardware. So it dramatically professionalized and specialized. And you have the same thing when it comes to the cyber crime attack chain and exploitation chain. You have specialists for every step of the route. But you also have that in how those people connect. Because now you have web platforms, forums, whatever, where this kind of technology is traded, where you make connections, where data is traded, where methods are discussed. So there's, in a way, you have something like open source crime happening there. I mean, it's not open source, but it's pretty open source. And you also have that for, like terror organizations, etc. This is something that happened in Iraq. This networking of criminal actors to share information, to share technology, and to share, special services has become a very big driving force there, and I think that a lot of it is also a generational thing. The older criminals, they wouldn't use a computer, and the modern criminal has like 5 smartphones, and he's using Tor, and he's all these things. If he's kind of smart and upcoming. And sooner or later, they read in the news, oh yeah, there are underground forums. And then they say, oh yeah, the ransomware people make so much money, I want to find one of those forums. And with enough dedication, they end up on one of those forums,
Well, I think a big driving factor is that a lot of classical police work in, trying to fight contraband is that they work up the chain.
Well, that is another driving factor. Yes.
And, so what that means is they catch a low-level dealer, and they're not really interested in the dealer nor the customers, because they ideally want to find the importer.
Yes.
So they want to, go up the chain, find the mid-layer seller who sold to the low-level dealer, and they can do a lot of things by just pressuring people.
Yes.
Say like, okay, you give us the name of your supplier and we let you off the hook, or you get a, very short sentence, and, or just surveil the guy, when he meets with his supplier. And a lot of the stuff, we discussed now with Dropgangs, you can use to separate the layers of the organization.
Yes.
So they don't actually have to know each other anymore. And they also don't need to do that for recruiting.
Yes.
I think because classical organizations, that's why they're often ethnic gangs, because they need this high trust. And so you cannot really join them if you're not born into them. And at the same time, they're very suspect, it's very easy to attack them.
Yes.
Through these, working up the chain, which is also why they need this very strong ethnic and also
with support networks for jail and so on and so on. It's very costly to run something like that. Yes.
Yeah, and they have this very, strong rules enforced through ethnic belonging and violence, just codes that they that prevents people from talking, or reduces the amount of talking. So this is actually makes it more efficient, makes it less dangerous, and like you said, makes it much easier for people to enter
and to specialize into something and sell to multiple organizations, etc.
Yeah, that too. I mean,
and working up the hierarchy becomes really hard. And I mean, the point of attack is the lower rank of the hierarchy, because they have customer contact. You know, they're exposed. I mean, the street dealer you just go there, basically. And with insulating the hierarchy so that the bottom cannot snitch on the higher layers makes those higher layers almost invisible. Because there's no necessary physical interaction. There's no phone number that you have, for example, because it's, some messenger that you're using. And, there's no address that you have, or you never saw the car of the higher up person. The only thing you get is locations for your supply. And that means there's no information flow that happens from the upper layers to lower layers. They don't leak information about themselves. And there's also no physical coincidence, that would allow a sting operation, for example, where you go to an exchange, and then arrest the next guy. That simply doesn't happen anymore. And if you're using this combination of, cryptocurrencies plus messengers plus threat drops, the higher levels are highly insulated. And of course, there is some issue with the higher levels as well. The highest level is the importers. And the importers have a high risk as well, because they're the ones that bring the stuff cross border, where there's a higher probability of being found, etc.
Sure. And if you're dealing with cryptocurrencies in larger amounts, it's also not trivial to actually exchange that without being traced, without being suspicious.
Exactly.
So, But given the profit margins in the usual goods that are traded there, it's actually quite
it's a profitable business.
Doable.
Yeah. Yes, it's a doable business. And there's a lot of in a way what we're seeing a lot now is that people, because of internet and because of media and because of public police reports and underground forums and whatever, the iteration speed for learning is much higher. Today, in a better criminal organization, you have people that are reading the police reports of everything that is kind of in their area and whatever. They kind of do open source intelligence to figure out what were the mistakes of somebody who got caught, and they try to adapt to that.
Yeah, I actually, it reminds me, I did some research a couple of years ago when the darknet markets came along, and you also had the corresponding forums, and people there were like trading tips, how you should, what we talked about earlier, how this postal system works, how they're tracking stuff, what would be suspicious. They were aware that they cannot, share the actual methods they use to conceal the goods in the shipments, but there was a lot of, let's say, open source intelligence, and there was a feedback loop.
Yes.
And of course you have people like handling mail who are also drug users. So they would use that method of being more anonymously on the forum to feedback the information into the system.
Plus also, feed information into the system that allowed them to take out drugs. That's a very common thing for larger drug shipments in the US. So you have organizations of people that work in the postal system that are specialized in stealing drug shipments.
Or taking them out in transit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that is really the interesting thing. So in a way, the communication you earlier had in prison, that is still there. There's still,
of course,
the school of crime is still prison, but there's now a more open curriculum, that is accessible to so many more people. And that also means that new kinds of people are finding their way into crime. It's not just the violence-oriented person or the hustler or whatever, but you have tech people, that basically realize that they know that there's something they can provide, and they're beginning to sell to that market. I mean, you have this with encrypted phones, that was a big thing, where you had companies of people securing or hardening phones and then selling them to criminals, to counter wiretapping and whatever. And those people were specialized tech providers for the crime field. But you have the same thing on so many different levels. As I mentioned before, there's customer relationship software for ransomware gangs, and there's API payment providers for money laundering, and there are trading platforms for carding. There are the companies that create skimming equipment. I mean, there are companies that do key cloning equipment, and so on and so on and so on. There's a huge market. Complexity-wise, there's a huge market there, and the same is true with Dropgangs. I mean, in a way, Dropgangs are using a lot of that technological advancement as well. They're looking at the problems of their scheme and then start to innovate.
Yeah, I suspect it will also lead to some form of like gamification. You know what I mean? It's like, let's say, Uber kind of gamified driving cars, and these, food delivery services, where these people drive with bicycles and deliver food. It's also somewhat gamified. You have an app and you pick up food, you bring it somewhere and you make money. Same for, I think in the US, it got really big for, teenagers to, charge these e-scooters.
Yes.
They were running around the city. They had an app. They had to pick them up, bring them somewhere, or bring them to their own home, charge them, and drop them off again. And I kind of see that happening here as well. Like what you said, you have multiple things you could do. The geek who could teach people how to set up the messengers, and And in a way, it's like how it worked a lot with, young people when they start getting into drugs. Some start buying for their friends because they knew the dude, but now this could really blow up.
Yes.
I mean, it can totally blow up, just these, like I said, I mean, a lot of these young people charging the e-scooters, they also did it not just for the money, but also for the fun of it.
Yes.
And if you're like a 16-year-old high on testosterone, it's much more exciting to serve drops, dead drops than charging e-scooters. I'm pretty sure of that.
For sure.
Yeah. And,
for sure.
Probably pays better too.
I mean, some of those gangs already are open to newcomers. They, in a way, they start to recruit their own clients. That is what often happens. It's the same thing in standard drug distribution organizations. If they're not, even if they're ethically bound, but they usually have like end customer support through a client. A lot of dealers are users, and a lot of dealers get into the business because they want to finance their own consumption.
Sure.
And in the Dropgangs, you have a little bit different. You have this thing where there's actually active recruiting going on. So where for people that buy drugs, but not in a very high quantity, not very hard drugs, not very often, etc., but reliably over a long time. There's sometimes this, hey, do you want to, work for us? This happens from time to time. And also people that are already in the lower ranks of a drop gang, they often tell their friends. Because it's a relatively easy work, and it's not that dangerous, because you don't have necessarily any contact with the real bad boys, and you don't have contact to the client, to the customers. It's something that doesn't require much more than a bicycle and a mobile phone. So for a lot of people, it is already a nice additional income. You don't make much money, of course. It's not like you're not getting rich with that, but it's relatively safe, relatively easy money. And the security requirements for new recruits are not very high, because of the profit margins that you have, plus the ability to communicate, plus using verification methods. So, for example, one of the things I've seen is that in dead drops, there would sometimes be little slips of paper with just few words on it, like 1-2 words, just random words. And I was wondering what they were. And there are two things they're used for. Number one is for verifying that the customer got the stuff and got the correct dead drop. Because sometimes the density is too high, you end up taking the wrong dead drop. And so from time to time, they would have this, can you send us the words on the piece of paper? And it's like a measurement tool they use. And the other thing is that it is used for verification in the sense that in the same distribution layer, you have people creating dead drops, and you have others that verify dead drops. So they would go and pick up a dead drop and then verify that the contents are okay, etc., and then replace it somewhere else.
So they make sure that the placement layer, that they're not cheating on them.
Exactly. It's not making sure, but there's
statistically sampling.
Exactly. It's a statistic sampling, which means that if you have trouble with a certain chain of drops or a certain delivery guy, that creates drops, you can start verifying him.
And I'm pretty sure since there, like you said, there are a lot of people from cybercrime that they already, have some statistics evaluation tools. Is the death drop loss rate too high for this?
Absolutely.
For this guy. And
I'm pretty sure it's an Excel file, but yeah, I'm pretty sure about that.
Is it statistically significant, or is it still in the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you had that before, smuggling networks have used statistical evaluation all the time, So, for drop gangs, for the more professional drop gangs, that is exactly what they're doing. And another thing that happens a lot is that because there's no direct interaction between the layers in such an organization, and they don't want any form of direct communication between them, they have different enforcement methods. They're not necessarily, even the middle layer doesn't know the real identity of distribution necessarily. And they don't necessarily want to know that, because it is a potential risk for them. If you unravel one layer, you unravel the whole organization, then you have to set it up again, etc. So there's both a horizontal and a vertical compartmentalization that they want. So
sure,
that means that they don't really have good access to, for example, violence. A lot of people in that area actually don't like violence.
Well, and I think there's a lot less need for violence.
Well, if you structure it correctly, there's less need for violence.
Because you simply, if somebody turns out to be unreliable, you just basically take him out of the organization. I mean, not like physically you don't have to kill him like in the mafia days. He doesn't get any business anymore.
Exactly. But before you discover that, it's sometimes that the damage is too high already. That is quite a common thing because you potentially hire drug users yourself. That's an issue. They're not known for high reliability, So you have to...
Well, that's why there's the don't get high on your own supply rule.
Exactly. So that is why a lot of those organizations incentivize their users to be reliable. So there are two things I've seen is negative and positive reinforcement. One thing is that a lot of the lower ranks are not paid until previous drops have been verified. So they're paid often by drop they're doing, and they're only paid for drops that come back verified from the client. So when the client says, "Hey, great, good product," etc., only then they get money. And also, they usually have to post the security. Often in cash, sometimes in crypto. It's often not very high, just a few hundred, which in a lot of those countries is a lot of money, but you make that money by working for those organizations within a month or two, so it's not too high. And then there's this funny thing that sometimes, and I know that from Ukraine, is that the higher ups give drugs to their lowers. And the reason there is actually because they're building a way of switching off lower ranks. So it's the violence coming back into the business. So what they're doing is they say, "Oh, you did a great job," or "We made a lot of money," or whatever. You can have a debt drop, take this one, and then people say,
as a bonus.
And then people say, "Oh, great, I can have that, and use it and whatever." And this happens a few times. And then the moment they think it's a normal part of the operation, they're switched off. So there's poison mixed into the drugs, for example. So there have been at least 2 cases I know about in Ukraine where that happened. So basically, lower levels have been poisoned by the upper levels for reasons I don't know, But so there's a need. So in a way, the higher levels really understand how that system works, and the lower levels don't often. And there's a real need for the lower levels to begin understand that this whole operational security game goes in both directions. Just because you're part of the organization doesn't mean that you're a friend. So that is one of the things that is happening there. So I think that all of these things basically lead to developing praxis in that field, and where you have a new form of organization, communication, and logistics developing around there.
It's a bit of a distributed organization.
It's a distributed organization. Yeah. And it's pretty anonymous. It's basically a physical, distributed, anonymous organization.
Or an agent network.
Agent network, yeah, exactly.
In a sense, it's really fascinating.
But coming back to the localization issue, because that was the question we detoured from. So dead drops have this issue that they shouldn't be immediately detectable, because that means that they're randomly detectable or detectable by an adversary. So you want some form of concealment, hiding, etc., which leads to, in a classical sense, like classical espionage use of dead drops, would mean that dead drops are reused. It's relatively expensive to create a concealment device and have the correct location and make it hard to surveil. And that led to reusage, and that reusage leads to your agents being discovered. Or your assets are being discovered. And it's also something you can't necessarily do with people that are completely untrained, that are potentially already high, and in an environment where you just need too many dead drops to actually make the effort. That simply doesn't work. And what you really want to have is a concealment device that simply fits into the environment that you can just throw or drop somewhere. No preparation, no hollowing out of walls or trees, no deep digging, all this stuff you don't want to do. You don't want to analyze the environment too much. You don't have the time for it, you don't have the money for it, etc. Which means that to fulfill the hard to discover by accident or adversary condition and the easy to discover by a high customer condition, there's a conflict that you have to solve.
Sure.
And the fascinating thing is that some of the Dropgangs have started to use technology for that. So probably the earliest thing that I saw were Bluetooth beacons, which are relatively cheap to get. It's basically little coin-sized devices, a little bit bigger than a coin, that have a battery in it and a Bluetooth signal. And you can basically use a smartphone to find them. And there were these Chinese clones, 2-3 years ago, that were really cheap, and you could get packs of a few hundred for almost nothing. And it was a discontinued commercial product. It's one of the things where electronics get really cheap, when there's overproduction and then you ship it in from Shenzhen,
Some failed startup.
Some failed startup. So, and this was a failed startup Bluetooth beacon project. And that is the first thing I saw, and that is what got me actually hooked on the whole subject, is to see that a relatively low-tech crime like drug dealing became extremely high-tech in a sense, where the street was repurposing technology. And in this case, you would, just send the beacon identifier to the customer during the dead drop exchange or the sales. And then the customer could use a smartphone to locate the dead drop better.
How does the locating work?
So there are multiple methods. There are active beacons, there are passive beacons. Active beacons send out a signal in addition to Bluetooth. That's like a sound, or they're flashing light or something like that. And then the passive ones require that you have a certain app that supports you in localizing the Bluetooth beacon. And it basically works by you basically triangulate the beacon. You walk around a little bit, and the app will tell you, okay, it's in this direction approximately that many meters, And so that is like standard tech, more or less. And there are more advanced stuff that has happened since then. You have stuff like that is my personal, how do you call it? That's where I mostly look at, is the beacon development, like what they do there. So one of the things is, since the ESP32 platform came out, a lot of more secure beacon systems have been developed. So, for example, there's this beacon that is an ESP32, very small one, only has, I think, 2 chemical batteries connected to it. And it's passive. It doesn't send out a signal at all.
Which makes it hard to find it by people who are not the customer.
Exactly. So you as a customer, you get a word that you set in your smartphone as the name of your tethering hotspot. So Wi-Fi tethering, you basically configure your tethering hotspot and put in that word that the dealer gave you and switch on tethering.
As the SSID.
Yeah. And then you just go there. And only when the beacon sees that specific network will it actually switch on, then either send out a signal or just make a noise.
So it just has to passively watch Wi-Fi.
Yes, it basically just switches on like once a minute, scans the Wi-Fi spectrum, and switches off again. Which also means that these devices can sit there for days, weeks, whatever. I'm not really sure how long you can do that, but weeks for sure, because they only go into high power mode every so often, and then they go into low power mode for a specific time.
That's an awesome hack.
It's an awesome hack, and
then you can do stuff like, put it in the ground when you have the right container. You just ram it in.
Yes.
Into the soil.
Yes.
And stuff like that.
Yes. So, I'm really waiting for it's probably like, 10 years in the future, but in the olden age, you had the dead drop spike, which was a metal spike that you could ram into the ground.
That's what I was thinking about now,
And then maybe in the future we have that augmented, with location technology, etc., where you can basically have a dead drop on every, pasture everywhere. But it's kind of fascinating because there are different ways on how to signal that the beacon is there. So, using Bluetooth and whatever to localize the beacon is apparently not working that awesome, or not good enough, especially for people that are high, apparently. And so one of the things that I've seen is sound. So you activate the beacon with, setting up the tethering in your smartphone, and then the beacon would make a sound, like a beep. Or another thing I've seen is using the vibration motor that you have in a smartphone for making vibrations. This is a little motor that is like off axis a little bit, and they would use that motor connected to a little sheet of metal, and then when the beacon would activate, it would make this rattling sound. So that is the kind of stuff that is experimented with, and it's also something that gets more and more professional. So apparently there are actually people that are specialized in building beacons, and it's a nice PCB. It's not the standard off-the-shelf stuff anymore, but it's a PCB that is made exactly for that, which is, as far as I know, still hand-soldered, but there are rumors of some specialized beacons that are actually pick and placed already. So there seems to be development of, the same thing you see with the skimmers. There's somebody there that is seeing a market and developing it.
But the per unit cost has to be very low. in order for it to be viable, right?
Well, you often have that for non-small volume dead drops. We're not talking about the $20, hashish, whatever.
Sure, but on the mid-layer distribution, you want to have more. You want to make sure that the goods they don't get lost, and then you can afford.
It is actually quite common for cocaine. So in cocaine shipments, because a lot of cocaine shipments, especially at the weekend, are higher value, and then beacons show up.
Now, if you're talking a few grams, then it's significant money.
And the beacon tag there, it's under $15 for sure. And some of those beacons are most likely somewhere around $6-7. So it's not that much money, especially if you have a certified customer, because it really means that as a customer, you don't go somewhere and have to search, but you kind of know the location. You just go there with your tethering on, and then you just follow the sound. It's really simple. And the sound is not that loud that it attracts, people that are 10 meters away or whatever. So it's a really sound location for humans works really well. And it makes it much more secure to use a dead drop, because it's easier to find. It's completely passive unless you have the access credentials. The containers are much more flexible, etc.
Well, and if you have a customer with credit, you can also have a back channel.
Yes.
Where when he pays, he gives back the beacons.
Well, I've never seen that.
Okay.
Maybe, but I've never seen that. It of course creates a new OPSEC threat,
Sure.
It basically means that now people are running around with their smartphones on, which is not the smartest of all ideas. However, the same thing you have for beacons, you also have for beacon activators, where the dealer actually gives you a device that is basically the same hardware as an ESP32 or an ESP2899, which basically is easily programmable. You just, punch in like 2 numbers, that's it. And it creates this Wi-Fi signal. And it's a $5 to $6 device. And you just carry it around, and then you get the dead drop location and the signal to send. You just punch in the signal, it's basically A's and B's. And you switch on the thing, you put it in your pocket, and go to that location. Then you just follow the sound. So it's a very directed pickup that you get there.
Mm. Fascinating. I agree. I think we will see a lot of innovation happening in this drop localization part of the whole thing.
Well, I think that it is a good symbol. No, not a symbol. It's an example for how, if you have a lot of limitations, pressures, whatever, like criminals have, and you combine that with cheap digital technology plus a lot of, other stuff that is coming now, there are completely different uses for technology. There's an explosion of creativity that happens, which kind of makes the future really unpredictable. A lot of our ideas about technology are that we imagine that people are using technologies only in the way they're meant to use them. So you have this big corporation, tech corporation, Apple, whatever, they're having this vision of the future. They're saying, and we will have this product and people will do this and so on. But what really happens as well is that the people that are not the tech mega corporations, but there's a street, they're using the same chips and whatever and creating new uses for technology.
Yeah, they are hackers in the original word sense of the word. They're
exactly.
Not hacking computers; they're hacking technology, finding different ways how to use it, twisting it a little bit, maybe. But
yeah, and in a way, it's like this whole spectrum. It's the technology that they hack, but it's also their environment that they hack. So, for example, where do you put a dead drop? For most people, I think, or at least, listening to the responses to that article that I wrote, is people don't actually have the imagination of where to put a dead drop.
Wasn't there one response that it's not possible to do this whole scheme because there are not enough places?
Yes, and I had a really hard time believing that. Believing somebody saying that. And we did actually this calculation that if there's a good location in Berlin every 100 meters on, every major street, then you only have to use each location once to supply one of the bigger darknet markets with dead drop locations, So there are like thousands of those locations, because cities are really big environments. There are like 5,000 kilometers of road in Berlin, for example, This is, it's a complex environment with a lot of opportunity.
And that would be a very, very low density of dead drops.
It's an extremely low density of dead drops.
And you can also go 3 dimensions. It's exactly. Not just that you have 2-dimensional area. You also have 3 dimensions. You can put stuff in trees and on whatever, lampposts and all kinds of shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Under stuff.
You use magnets. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it in the ground.
It's kind of fascinating because, so one of the things, we're in Berlin, this is our environment and this is where we play. Berlin is our playground. And one of the things we've done like years ago is to use this utilities keys to open all the utility boxes that are in the city. You have that in the subway, you have that in a cafe, in the toilet, all those stuffs, you have those hundreds and thousands of places that are not meant for the public, but where there's such a big user group that they're not well protected. Same thing is true for lampposts. You can open all the lampposts, and there's a lot of space in there. And the last thing I witnessed just, I think last week or the week before, and in broad daylight, is walking down the street, and there was a guy on a bicycle coming, and he was opening one of those, basically a hole in the ground. Like in the middle of the pavement, there was this lid that he opened, and underwards was I don't know, some maybe installation.
Water for like fire department or something?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if exactly what it was. I don't know. But he opened the thing like within 2-3 seconds. He had it open, and he put 2 small black packages in there and closed it again. And it was gone.
And he needed a special tool, you said.
Yeah, and he had the special tool to open this thing. And then I looked around, and they're like, every 10 meters, there's one of those things in the street. And somehow this dude, whatever he was doing, I didn't check, I'm not stupid enough to do that. But this dude basically operated some kind of drop operation. It's the first time I've actually seen that here in Berlin. But I never thought about these spots, but there was this dude who clearly thought about them and specialized in operating them. He had the special tool, and he had the whole demeanor in doing it, it was quick, and it was a broad daylight. He didn't care about anybody seeing him, nothing.
Might have been some mid-level exchange because of the special tool, but it also makes it much more secure. The location,
Yes.
I think another part of the argument on your article was that, not only that there are not enough places, but that other people would, let's say drug users would search for them and would easily find them and steal the drugs.
True. Which is the same argument, basically.
Yeah.
It's a question of density. Dark users are not necessarily known for doing things that have no reward. The drug user searches the places where he expects drugs to be found. But if he goes around and goes through all the trash in a park, that's not a pleasant way of doing that, number one. And number two, it's relatively easy to combat by the drop gangs. If they see somebody doing that, it's a really easy thing, to teach that person to never do it again. And it's also completely without profit if the number of dead drops or potential dead drop locations is relatively high compared to the number of actual dead drops used. And we're not talking about millions of dead drops. We're not talking about thousands, even in a city like Berlin, you're maybe talking about a few hundred that are widely dispersed over the city, So the probability of actually finding something is nothing.
Even thousands you could easily hide, especially since they are only there for a very short time.
Right.
So,
plus you can make it really dangerous for the drug user. So, the same thing that this Ukrainian gang is doing to get rid of, lower level people, you can do there as well. And it would be the first time.
Well, I really couldn't understand that argument. But please, if one of the listeners has can formulate that argument better or has experience with it, send us an email. We'd be happy to hear from you.
No, it's really, I think it really has to do with not being aware of your surroundings. Look at your city, look at all the things that you can abuse. The city is full of that.
Yeah. I did that also for a while, just for the fun of it. It's similar to when let's say you want to be more private and you think about, how could I get an anonymous SIM card, or how could I, travel without showing ID and stuff like that. Once you start thinking about it, there are a lot more ways than you initially thought there are. Since we are talking about drops, maybe let's expand that a little bit and go into caching.
Yeah, good idea. So, caching is basically a dead drop that is not for communication, but it's something where you hide something for picking it up later, And the topic is a little bit interesting because of the how to preserve my wealth, how to protect myself against bad situations, etc. So, in a way, a lot of these methods of hiding stuff for dead drops apply for caches as well. So utility boxes, lampposts, and whatever are low frequency inspection, and they have a lot of place where you can hide stuff. So there are people that use that for caching. So, for example, I myself am using caches to store copies of my keys around Europe. Just in case something happens, I want to be able to recover my life. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that your good secrets don't leak, but are still available no matter what happens? And the best thing you can do for that is you cache them. You put them in locations where you can go, you can retrieve them, you can decrypt the key with your secret passphrase that you never use for anything else. And then that's the same thing. It's a long-term cache. It's USB sticks all over Europe, basically. And the same thing is true for if you need cash or documents or gold. How do you make sure that this stuff is never lost? Especially if you deal with adversaries, somebody breaking into your home, etc. And there's a really good thing. It's called the CIA Caching Manual, which is specialized on how to build caches to store equipment for operations, basically for fall behind armies and for infiltrating into countries. And it's fascinating if you look at the problem with enough creativity. There's you realize that the whole world is a playground that you can abuse. So, for example, there are things like you bury stuff not next to a tree but under a tree in a pipe. You have this pipe digging tool which is relatively small, and you just go under a tree, then put a pipe with your goods in there, and then close it up. So you can store relatively high volume of goods without disturbing a lot of the earth. Plus, it's kind of out of reach of somebody searching with a sensor, for example, because it's under the tree. Or another thing, that I personally found fascinating and scary at the same time is to use lakes for storing stuff. So one of the things apparently the US has done during the Cold War is to use small lakes in the countryside to bury stuff in the lake. But, I mean, not like in 30 meters depth, but more like in 5 meters depth. And just bury it there, because the water doesn't move too much, so there's not a high risk of the stuff being accidentally revealed. And it's accessible enough, if you know exactly where it is, that you can dive there without equipment and retrieve it.
Oh, but they buried it with the diver, probably.
Mm-hmm.
It was a professional diver.
Right. You need a lot of time to bury it, but to retrieve it, it's not that much time that you need, So, and they had like weapons caches and stuff like that for if the Russians ever go through Europe, then there would be those weapons caches in lakes, basically, where you could just jump in if you know the exact location, and retrieve a gun or whatever. And the interesting thing is that, all those potential locations are actually not the message. The message is that if you apply enough creativity, you can turn the world into something that operates on knowledge. What I mean with that is the security of a cache is really the same as the security of a dead drop, because you find a cache or a dead drop by knowledge. You have to know where it is. And you can use that to hide stuff, protect stuff, etc., with knowledge that is transmittable or that you keep to yourself. So, for example, if you have to have the bad weather fund, in gold, and you don't want to keep it in a safe deposit box, stuff like that, then caching in the countryside is really effective. The probability of that being found is extremely small.
Well, and a cache doesn't cost you much, so you can distribute your gold coins over many caches.
Exactly.
I was just thinking about it, how cool it is, when you distribute, gold coins over these caches, because it also means you have like a form of payment.
Yes.
By just giving out addresses.
The locations. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of much better than a brain wallet when you're in prison, when you can actually send the money, to a trusted person. You can tell them like, this is where you need to go. And
yeah. So, there are a lot of these techniques that, it's not a new technique. Caches is not something that the CIA invented. It's,
of course not, no.
It's, I don't know, probably all humanity did that, because humans realized, okay, the planet is really big, and going and digging up every spot of it to search for something is very inefficient.
Well, and you always have the problem, if you're not like a nomad, but when you live somewhere, whether it's the police coming or some robbers, all that stuff that it's in your house, it's kind of, it's really hard to hide stuff in your house perfectly. If somebody searches well, he will find everything. But with a cache, you can hide it anywhere.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be connected to you at all.
Exactly. Yeah. So you
just make sure that you switch off your cell phone, don't go through a speed trap with your car on the way there, basic OPSEC
stuff. Yeah, stuff like that. And don't forget the location.
That's useful as well.
Forests kind of change in how they look like. So make sure you will find it again. You don't want to dig through half a forest.
But even there, there's these devices that are used for secret agent communications have been since the 60s. Where they're basically stationary communication devices. And some of them were built for an extreme lifetime, like 20 years. They were hidden in a space, and they would sit there for 20 years or 30 years. And when you look at modern electronics, modern battery technology, you can probably build something like that for, 50 years. And that can help you to find your cache if you know the right secret word to send to it again.
Fascinating.
So absolutely. And I think that in general, especially for people like us that are more like the digital people, internet and stuff, it's really important to open one's eyes for the physical world again. Not just to see the beauties and the dangers and whatever, but to really see the opportunity that there is in the physical world. I think that especially for crypto anarchists, it's always this issue that they completely ignore the physical world, and there's so much opportunity on what you could do with it, and there's so much fun to be had, actually. It is actually fun, even to play the death drop game with a few friends.
I mean, that's why geocaching as a game is basically popular.
So in a way, this becoming more creative on how to exploit the physical world is a really good thing. And there's a lot to learn there. It's not just geocaching and dead drops and caches, but it's also like lockpicking, for example. Lockpicking is one of the most profitable skills that you can have when you're interested in the physical world. I mean, something as trivial as accessing a roof can be a beautiful thing, Like in the morning, you are the one who has not the key, but the ability to access the roof, You see the sunrise and have breakfast there. It gives you a completely new perspective on your environment. I mean, be careful, there are dangers there. It's often illegal, so consult your lawyer. But we don't have to only be hackers with our computers. The physical world is there to be hacked as well.
And I think to bring it back to the subject of Dropgangs, caching is also very important, or I see it as very important for like mid and higher layers to improve the OPSEC.
Yes.
You don't want to stash higher amounts of suspicious goods or money in your house. So
never.
You kind of cache that in different locations, helps you recover, makes you more resilient. So, and it is a different thing from dead drops in the sense that it has, different requirements.
Yes.
That stuff you can actually put in the woods in the countryside.
Yes.
For certain use cases. It's not.
I mean, as you said, mid-level distribution also means that the receiver can travel more. There's less time pressure, etc. So yeah, all of the woods become your playground.
Yeah. But then, of course, the traveling there becomes a bit of a problem, depending on the country. I mean, then you're driving around with stuff, but.
True.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of woods outside of cities which is still close.
Right.
Where you can go by the bicycle or whatever.
I mean, really fascinating is when you think ahead, like take this principle of widely available technology being used for new purposes, which has been like the driving thought in the whole Dropgang article and how I deal with that, is this fascination of where it could lead. So let's have some wild speculation here. So for example, what I think would be seriously awesome is when we teach UAVs, like drones, cheap drones, to operate temporary dead drops. Because there's this whole space that is usually not human accessible and that is really hard to surveil, but is really accessible by drones, and that is rooftops. Especially in cities, a vast majority of the roofs are flat, more or less. So
especially for high rises.
Yeah. And it's a place where nobody really looks. You don't see it from the street. And especially at night, you can basically do whatever you want there. And if you had a drone that can fly to one of those spots, drop something and fly away, then have another drone go to the same location, pick up the container and fly, what you basically get is the basic mode of a physical mixing network. Because it's so easy to have a lot of these locations. The hard part really is not just the autonomy of the drone, which is not that bad anymore, because a lot of flight controllers, even open source flight controllers, have autonomous abilities. But it's more like the mechanics of connecting a container and releasing a container that is the hard part. And
standardizing on the container. You kind of have to standardize on
yes.
one or a few container sizes. Ideally, something you can 3D print.
Yes, exactly.
And,
or build out of standard materials.
Open source design.
But it's not a hard problem. It's a problem that requires a lot of iterations, but it's not a hard problem. And even consumer drones, they have enough carrying power that you can add a few grams. So for the standard contraband shipment today, that is completely enough. And the interesting thing is, if you then think about how can you progress with that? I mean, think big, we always think big here, mostly for, targeting the stars and reaching the moon, is that if you have this building block of being able to drop a package and pick up a package with a drone, then stuff like paid mixed networking for drone carriage becomes possible. So, for example, it could look like this. You have a container that has some form of data storage on it to communicate with the drone. And it tells the drone, I want to go to a certain location, and as soon as I'm there, you get a payment. And at the location, you have a key beacon. So basically an electronic device that spits out secret keys, while the public keys for that have been published long before. So it gives you a way of cryptographically basically telling the success of the delivery.
To the container.
To the location, of the container to the location. So the container can basically look up the secret key for a public key that he has stored to decrypt the payment that is in the container and send it to the drone. And then the drone can just fly off. And if the payment system is structured in the right way, the payment itself becomes a signal again, which allows some digital agent to direct the next drone to exactly that container to pick it up and fly somewhere else, repeating the process. And it's something that you can repeat over and over and over and over again. It's just, limited by the number of drones, basically. Not even by the number of locations where you can do that, because they go into the hundreds of thousands in the biggest city. And if your containers are relatively standardized, relatively secure, that basically would allow you to send an anonymous package from A to B in a city with very, very high untraceability probabilities, including every drone operator being paid for the service.
Where we would see again this specialization part. People, for example, just focusing on building those drones or operating them or building the containers.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can also see the nice blend between purely, crypto anarchy ideas, what you described, the location oracle, should we say? Yeah. And payment system, and then combining that with the physical world via the drones.
Exactly.
And I think the general, which is why I believe this belongs to Dropgangs, the general principle here is that we want to have a system which is completely parallel to the existing system. Mm-hmm. With darknet markets, cryptocurrencies really enabled them, because the link of payments through credit cards didn't really work. But the biggest weakness was, first of all, the centralization of the markets, but even bigger, the postal service.
Yes.
Because it's an existing system they have to use, and that's where they can easily be attacked.
Yes.
And then with dead drops, that creates a new method, but it's just one method. And what you just described is
a potential next method.
It's another method. Also with more use cases. If you spin that further, once you take in just not like quadcopter drones, but you take fixed wing drones, then you have potentially delivery over hundreds of kilometers.
Yes.
And that
crossing borders.
That's the key. I mean, you don't have to go to South America, but when you can cross borders, then it's a whole new ball game.
Yes.
And you could do the same thing with, the containers. You could also just drop them.
Yes.
Like from flight, basically, or at a location, GPS coordinates. And
yeah, if the drones have enough reach, let's say something like 250 to 300 kilometers, that's enough to have so much potential starting and landing points, both sides of the border, that it's relatively easy to cross it. If you're going too close to the border, the surveillance there is very high and stuff like that. If you go 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers inland from a border, then you're in pretty good shape, because there's so much territory that would have to be surveilled. It's impossible. And even if you're detected, the time to respond to it is far too long. It will take hours to reach you if you're smart. And it's also enough to, at least in most places of the world, to jump like small lakes and stuff like that, to jump, I don't know, the Strait of Gibraltar, you kind of want to jump that as well. And then they should be fast, relatively fast. That's like 100, 150 kilometers an hour. It's probably enough, If you wait 2 hours from start to land, that's probably all it takes. And terrain following would be nice. So you don't want to rely on GPS. You don't want to rely on the drone having electronics exposed. So there are actually free market available terrain following sensors. You can, if you have a good enough map, you can follow terrain in something like 30 to 40 meters height with 200 kilometers speed, with available relatively cheap technology right now. So basically, we can build our own cruise missiles, except that we're not delivering death but life. So that is something that it's actually not science fiction. It's not something that is in the future so far, in the sense that there are enormous problems to be solved. It's mostly somebody sitting down and recombining the technology that already exists.
Yeah. Which, it kind of, for me, it's often a bit disappointing that there's a lot of, let's say, activity going on in the makerspace.
Yeah.
But there's so little.
And all it is lights.
Yeah, it's a lot of lights.
Yeah.
Blinking lights. And there's so much low-hanging fruit, like what we just talked about, that would be really, really useful.
Well, it would be revolutionary.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about it, just the two things we described. The, urban mixed network for drones, which is mostly a mechanical engineering issue. Everything else is really trivial. But the mechanical engineering for picking up the container and dropping it again, which is not that hard. That is number one. And number two, long-range drones, autonomous terrain-following drones. Those are reachable tools that, if you think about the implications of them, those implications are dramatic. And I often have this issue, there are people that come to me and say, oh yeah, I'm bored, or I don't know what to do. If you're one of those people, you're bored or you don't know what to do that and build a way to pick up containers with a cheap commercial drone, or build a long range drone. It doesn't have to be 300 kilometers. Start with 50. Doesn't matter. Iterate, become better, because the implications are really that technology eats up the physical space as well. It's not just the apps, and it's not just the software, and not just the internet and whatever, but physical processes are something that we can hack. And one of those physical processes are borders. Long-range drones hack borders.
And then we are not just talking about drugs anymore. There's a lot of use cases that make total sense. For example,
medication.
Yeah. Or, I heard the meat prices in Switzerland are really high, and they have this meat import tax.
Meat smuggling drones.
Exactly.
Awesome. Or stuff like money.
Dropping stakes.
The dropping stake. The flying stakes in corporate.
Yeah, money. I mean, once you have all of that and like your messenger where you communicate, ideally also a mixed-net messenger too.
Sure.
We should add here. You don't even need any digital payments.
Yes.
It's great to have them.
Yes.
It makes it easier, but you don't necessarily need to.
Right. If you hack this physical space well enough, you can send a gold coin from A to B. Exactly.
So that's all you need. Yeah. Go back to the gold standard.
Go back to
No, yeah. I mean, seriously.
No, I completely agree. And it's not just, flying drones. It's also underwater stuff. Submarines, and there's a lot of use for drones for oceanic research. And a lot of that is like university student projects driven. Stuff like fish simulators and stuff like that. It's drones that behave like fish to follow fish around, or there's this thing, it's called dipping drone, I think, which basically uses the pressure and heat differences in the ocean to navigate. So it basically floats and then sinks and floats and sinks. It's very efficient. It can travel for thousands of kilometers. And a lot of these projects are really cheap. They're not like millions. They're often like 10,000 euros or something like that. And also stuff like self-attaching submarines. So they attach to container ships and stuff like that and just hitch a ride, so to speak. And
I think it's not only interesting for crossing oceans, it's also interesting for using rivers and canals.
Oh, exactly.
Because that's
downstream for sure. Upstream, it's an energy issue probably.
Yeah, but then you could do the attaching stuff again.
True. True. So, and a lot of these things have been really hard to do like 10 years ago. But today, I mean, I'm just saying, Chinese electronics, 3D printing, CNC mills, relatively cheap CNC mills. You can go a long way with homemade tech. We've experimented with some of that stuff ourselves, like, 5 years ago. It was relatively hard. Do it today, it will be so much easier. If you have any skills in that area, it's a good problem to solve.
But I would add that the window to do that, it will close at some point. And when it closes, you need all that stuff in place, because then you need to buy your drone parts through Dropgangs because they have been regulated.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the current upcoming FAA regulations in the US, where they want every drone to be online trackable, basically, every newly sold commercial drone. And drones that don't have that technology can only be flown at specific places. And those places are basically shut down to a certain percentage per year to actually drive out drones out of the market that don't have the tracking technology. So the next step, sooner or later, is they will say, you can build your own drone that doesn't have the tracking technology. So we have to regulate a few parts, critical parts. So I don't know what that will be, motor control ESC, or will it be certain motors, or will it be the frames, or the flight controllers probably. They will sooner or later decide that it's not a good idea that flight controllers are publicly sold.
Or that takes the shit out of it. So that again makes it economically viable for a lot of other use cases apart from the dominant one right now, which is drugs.
In a way, drugs is just, it's more a symbol than anything else. Drugs and guns, it's like the standard black market goods.
Mm.
But, I mean, I remember my parents. So my parents smuggled stuff, but what they smuggled was pharmaceuticals. Not like to get high, but to get well. And they smuggled that into the East Bloc. That was one of the things they did. I mean, Germans did that a lot. There were Western Germans that smuggled stuff that the Eastern Germans didn't have, into Eastern Germany to help. And that was illegal. I mean, these were real crimes to be committed. If you were caught, that wasn't nice, but it was a good thing to do. And now with the increase of regulation and probably a coming increase of regulation for technology, it's a future necessity, I think, to keep certain technologies and tools available. And for that, you need this ability to move contraband from A to B. I mean, they're like certain chemicals that I was allowed to buy as a kid when I was 14 or something. I could go to the pharmacy and just buy it. And today, they need a special permit to be bought. You know, something I couldn't get.
We are going a bit on a detour here, but since you mentioned it, I'm not sure if like the current generation actually can understand how drastically regulation increased.
Yes.
I mean, I remember buying a knife in a store, I think I was 16, which is now a forbidden good in Germany.
Yes.
So it's not that you're not allowed to carry it. You're not allowed to even own it.
Yes.
It's a crime to own it. And
yes.
I bought it. You know, I remember sitting on airplanes where there were people smoking.
Yes.
And, you know, smoking joints on the train.
Yeah.
Shit like that. It's incredible how much the regulation increased. And we're not much safer for it, I believe.
Well, we're not just not safer for it, but it also reduces the ability to progress and develop. You know, I mean, certain technologies are not widely available anymore. Certain tools, certain chemicals, whatever. There are far fewer people that will apply these to new problems, you know, and experiment and learn and whatever. And sooner or later, the horror scenario is if you only can use tools in a way that are allowed, you know, like basically making hacking in general illegal, you know, hacking everything, you know, not just computers, but everything illegal. And you basically get a license for a product that says you can use this product only in this way. That's basically the end of development. You know, then maybe you have like the big corporations doing some kind of development, but it means that your problems don't get solved anymore. You don't have a place anymore in solving your problems.
Well, you're not supposed to solve your problems. You're supposed to work, pay taxes, and then pay rent for all of your products. You're not even supposed to own any products anymore. You're supposed to rent them continuously.
Yeah, but that's shit.
I know it's shit.
No, I mean, in a way, if this whole, I mean, you're right, you know, this whole sharing economy, blah, 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 you know, if that continues forever, then the end result of that is just people following script. You go to work at a certain time, you leave work at a certain time, you rent your car, you rent your house, you rent your computer, you know, and nothing in this world is your own anymore. And not even the ability to take your computer and throw it on the ground because it doesn't work, you know, to make sure it won't work in the future as well. So in a way, it's constraining something that is fundamentally human, I think, you know, the whole aspect of tool use. I mean, of course, there are animals doing it, you know, but we have thumbs basically because we're using tools. And it's a fundamental thing for being a human to use tools, develop tools, break tools. It's part of the fun of being a human. And taking that away for me, it's hard to imagine to live in a world that is even as regulated as we are today. You know, I have real issues with that already. But look into the future, you know, continue this trend for another, 20 years, and we're doomed.
So thumbs up for Dropgangs. It will allow us to use more tools in the future.
Exactly.
One of those tools are, I believe, lockboxes.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's another thing that kind of fits into the physical transport layer narrative, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know you're a big fan of it. Maybe give us an introduction.
What do you mean with big fan?
But you can't stop talking about
it. Thank you. No, I find this concept really good, which is, so the standard lockbox is what you have at the, let's say, a train station to lock your your luggage for a few hours. And what it basically gives you is a space that you own, which also means that everything in there you own, because ownership is really about control. And
like a compartment in time and space, you own it for like a certain time, and a certain space you own for a certain amount of time.
Exactly. And then most of these places are meant and actually built for a single owner. For example, for your luggage, you often get a key that you have to physically carry with you and then reuse it. But in the last few years, what has happened more and more is that those boxes are pin controlled. You have a pin that you punch in.
I also recently saw one which was actually QR controlled. You get a receipt with a QR code, and then you show it to the machine later, and it opens.
That basically brings this thing back that we mentioned before, that is physical control by knowledge. So a key is something you have. It's relatively hard to transmit. I mean, yes, you can photograph it and then the other party 3D prints it and whatever, but that's very complicated. But a pin code and a location of the lockbox is an almost ideal way to transmit something. And you have that for stuff like, I don't know, Airbnb, for example. You have providers for lockboxes, and also Airbnb people that just put a mobile lockbox somewhere in the environment. You've seen those things that are basically looking like big locks that you put on a lantern or whatever with a little a numeric code to open it that stores the key. And this exists in multiple forms, hacked forms, etc. And this whole realm is basically about physical control over something by knowledge. You know the pin, you know the code, you own the thing. That is really it. So transferring that knowledge means you transfer ownership. And I think it really becomes interesting when those lockboxes themselves become movable, or at least not necessarily movable globally or whatever. But if within a structure where you have a lot of lockboxes, the individual lockbox can change location when it's a little container. And you have that for some safe deposit systems today, where you go into a cabin, you put in your code, and then a robot brings you the box that you then open, put your stuff, and then press a button, the robot disappears with your box again. And if you use the same example and say, okay, I can transmit access to that box and access to that location to somebody else, then you can actually have physical mixing points, where you put something into a lockbox and it disappears in the system, and then somebody else can recall the box and open it. So that's like the extreme end of the spectrum. So it starts with little Airbnb style key lockboxes that you can place in the environment to hide small amounts of something. They're not actually that trivial to break, and not that trivial to steal, actually. It's quite interesting. And they're actually dead drops. In a way, they're access controlled dead drops that are used for high value goods, because the keys to an apartment is a high value good. And it's a common thing. I mean, I've been to, I don't know, somewhere in the East recently, where I came by a window that had 15 key locks attached to it. There was a whole bunch of those things. And I was thinking how many of them actually contain keys and how many of them contain drugs. So it's a tool that is widely accessible, that is very common in a lot of environments, and that even comes with access control. If you have a thing like that and you put your contraband in, the guy who's looking for drugs is not going to open it. It's far too hard. And nobody cares about the thing being there, because there are 50 other hanging there for all the Airbnb apartments around town. So that's the lower end of the spectrum. It's easily hackable. And then you have the things at train stations. You have the things at airports. Then one of my favorites is IKEA, where they have those pin-coded stuff to store your bag while you're browsing IKEA, and you can transmit the location and the pin easily. And then on the upper spectrum, you have the professional safe deposit box robot systems that are, at least for me, highly fascinating. And a good example of this combination of knowledge and the physical, because that is kind of the magic. The magic of crypto anarchy in the physical is knowledge. You reduce everything to knowledge, and then cryptography can be applied.
Yeah, I mean, you can go a lot more complicated with access control than just exchanging PIN numbers.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I think on the high end, what's also very fascinating idea is that you would have drones delivered to lockboxes.
Oh, yeah.
You employ your drone parcel mix network, and it delivers to a lockbox, and then you pick it up there.
Yeah, I think that's a good goal to have for latest 2030.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And since the whole storage industry is kind of booming, I think there's a lot of business potential for people who build these systems and make it a little bit abusable, so to say.
Yeah.
I mean, there are also companies who now offer storage where they basically pick up a box and put it in some long-term storage and stuff like that. We just kind of have to cryptographically enhance all of that stuff, and then it becomes really, really usable.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, a lot of these systems are already hackable, but they're not ideal. But I think it also shows this trend that the physical is becoming much more fluid. Your location, where your stuff is, etc., is becoming more and more fluid. And
you mean because people are becoming?
Why does self-storage is so big business? Because the concept of where you live, where your stuff is becoming more fluid.
Sure, yeah, that's what I thought you mean, that people become more of they change location way more.
Yeah.
That's why Airbnbs are booming, all this Uber stuff, all the transport methods.
And then that actually means that this whole aspect of location, knowledge, access control, etc., is becoming a really big thing, becoming dramatically important for a lot of business models that are sought after. And which also means that there's an opening for crypto-anarchistic businesses to say, okay, we're interested in developing this technology plus a little bit of hackability. And it also shows that our environment can potentially become more attractive for crypto-anarchistic methods, because this fluidity is something we can hide in, that we can abuse, that we can hack, etc.
Yeah, I think a lot of these business models we can already see, like mainstream business models, they actually came from the fact that the normal way of doing things is too expensive for modern use cases. Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. Let's say you go to Berlin for 3 months. It's simply not possible to rent an apartment. Like the overhead cost of regularly renting an apartment, and then there's no furniture in there. Just finding it, getting a contract, then you need the furniture. It's way too high, so you get an Airbnb. It's same for transport. Like the car sharing thing is so popular, and they now expanded it to transporters because the overhead of just renting a normal car is way too high. It takes too much time. And in the storage industry, you still have that problem. If you want to have a storage space, you still have to go to some office, and, you have to make a contract, and it's going to take you like half an hour.
At least.
Probably.
At least.
Yeah. And you can only go there during business hours. And, I did it a few times. It's like pages of like contract shit. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do like a midterm rental. Mm-hmm. Like the stuff on a train station, it's okay. You can do it for, let's say, 24 hours.
Yeah.
But I think there's like definitely, demand for
1 week, 2 weeks,
1 week, 2 weeks, even 3 months, just a small thing. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm going to be back in Berlin in 2 months, and I have this luggage I don't want to take to my other trip.
This has happened so often to me. I actually stored stuff at the airport luggage room because of exactly that.
Yeah.
You know, why carry it around for another 2 weeks?
Yeah.
You know, you pay €100, you know, and it stays there.
And that's also where there are a lot of legitimate use cases where you would like, oh yeah, I'm going now to, you know, location A, and then I'm going to B, but the stuff I have with me, I only need it at B, so I just pre-ship it there.
Yes.
And you can pick it up.
Yeah, or stuff like, you know, I had that a couple of times where I basically had to go home to drop my stuff before going to a club or whatever, because, you know, I had my laptop with me, etc. Where you put it, you know? If there was a secure lockbox on the corner of the street where I could put my laptop and stuff in, you know, and say, hey, I'm going to pick it up after clubbing, you know, I would use it all the time.
I think we should start charging for this. We're giving out so many business ideas. Just kidding.
True.
Just send us 5%, guys.
Exactly. Our 5%. It's the crypto anarchist tax.
We're not going to be able to enforce it though. Yeah. So we talked about, transferring goods with Dropgangs, and we also talked about transferring money like cash or gold coins with it. But I was thinking we could also transfer data by transferring USB sticks or hard drives and basically creating so-called sneakernets, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because we're by far not the first to have that idea. So there's actually a historical case on using digital debt drops, like electronic devices hidden in public for communication. So it's been in Russia, where the British intelligence, for example, had this fake rock that would allow one of their assets to send and receive data by just walking by that rock with his smartphone. And there's an interesting aspect of using these short range communication networks that are physical. And that is, they are extremely hard to surveil. So on the internet, you know, everything flows through routers. The whole infrastructure is more or less immediately accessible. But if you're using these store and forward boxes in the physical, to actually de-anonymize them and trace them requires physical presence. You know, you have to have surveillance equipment and people on the ground for that to work. And it extends to the movement of data. You know, so having a Dropbox where you store data or retrieve data, like the Pirate Box is one of the projects that does exactly that, is that you can also use the whole logistics layer in moving the stuff, like drones, etc., to bypass the internet or to communicate even if the internet isn't there anymore. I mean, look at places like Iran, Hong Kong, Chile, Venezuela, half of Africa. There's so much attacks on international communication. You know, in case of protests, etc., they lock down so much. And setting up a complete physical infrastructure with wires and whatever is huge investment and easy to take down. But so-called delay tolerant networks, where you basically aggregate messages, transport them, and then relay them, are so much more cheaper and also more resilient. It's actually funny because the NSA is using delay tolerant networks to exfiltrate data from secure facilities because of those properties. And what is relatively easily to do is, I mean, you could have couriers, you know, traveling through the over the border, carrying data, gives you a lot of bandwidth. You know, I mean, you travel for a day and you can carry 100 terabytes, you know.
Yeah, the overall throughput is actually great if you do the numbers.
Exactly. But you could as well do that with drones. Imagine like long distance drones. You could fly them in and out of areas where there's no internet anymore and at least establish something like email communication or synchronization of Wikipedia copies, you know, or library genesis, or, all the important things in our lives. A lot of that stuff doesn't have to be necessarily somewhere in the internet. You can have a local proxy, local cache for it.
Yeah.
And then synchronize changes with long distance drones and just big hard disks.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the protocols are not in use anymore that allow that, because people kind of got used to having continuous internet, but there's no technical reason why we can't do these things.
It's actually funny because a lot of the early internet kind of worked like that a little bit.
Yeah.
When you look at Unix to Unix copy, UUCP, there was actually a delay tolerant network in the sense that most nodes weren't connected most of the time. So the nodes would synchronize only when they connect and then disconnect again. And it allows a lot of the basic functionality, sending messages like email, sending files, or synchronizing caches. All these things still work quite well.
Yeah, like you said, you can transfer a lot of data, but it's also very surveillance resistant.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what Osama bin Laden used to hide his communications. He basically wrote emails, but he didn't have an internet connected computer. He would read and write his emails on a disconnected computer and have couriers, and I believe even multiple of them. He did mixing. For the end stage, he had one or two, I'm not sure, trusted couriers. And so that's how he would communicate, because he knew that they would use all their existing power to track him.
Yeah.
And that way he prevented that.
Yeah, exactly.
And was still able to send emails. I mean, they would literally, take a USB stick, go to some internet cafe eventually and send it off.
Exactly.
Under a different name, of course, but
yeah. And to a certain degree, one could professionalize that or make it more efficient by the use of drones.
Of course, yeah.
And I mean, a drone flying around, sitting on the roof, switching on Wi-Fi, and then you just synchronize, and then the drone flies to the next spot, and you synchronize, etc. That's what you do.
I was just having this idea that you could also, fly this drone to near some festival or club, and you announce a Wi-Fi hotspot with a, telling name.
Yeah.
And then people can connect, basically, and then you have a website and stuff like that. I mean, there's a million things you can do when you just combine a few of these very basic and cheap.
It is really about the combination of things.
Yeah.
That makes it powerful. There are a lot of technologies today that individually are fun, but if you combine them in the right way, they become revolutionary. And then a lot of things are changeable. And in a way, I kind of want us to be the ones that combine them, because there's a dark side to all of this. A lot of these technology is, if combined by totalitarian states, would be really bad, or combined by people that are after violence could be really bad. And in a way, I think we are in almost something like an arms race. It's not a direct confrontation, but it's more, there are multiple versions of the future that could be instantiated, and they are a lot about how technology is combined by whom.
Yeah.
That's the game going on right now. And a lot of, so these futures are not really compatible with each other. There's an either or, there's not an and,
Yeah.
And I really don't like the other potential futures that can be instantiated, because that would be really bad for humanity. I mean, forget freedom, forget survival even. I think that if we mess up the next, 10 years, we're going to mess up in a way that is probably not recoverable. And that means that it should be us to combine and develop the right technologies to instantiate a future where humanity has a chance. It might not be, it won't be in a utopia, it won't be nice, it will be gritty, but it's at least an option, we could progress from there.
Yeah, it might sound a bit dramatic, but I'm totally with you on that. I think we kind of have the technological substrate right now from which we could build different futures, or from which we can build different futures, and that's actually the only realistic option we have is to use this substrate and build something with it. We're not going to stop technological development. We're not going to revert to like earlier stages. And like you said, and I almost see it like that the default path is the shitty one.
Yes.
The mass surveillance, AI, face recognition, tracking everything. I mean, there's a million things. This is going in the wrong direction. And right now there are still options.
Yeah.
To build a different future and to have, more freedom. And like like you said, kind of preserve humanity, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Allow people to keep that. And like I said, it might sound like too dramatic, but I also believe that we could get in a non-recoverable state.
Mm-hmm.
Like a worldwide technological totalitarian system, or even an extinction event caused by maybe just an accident. Once you reach that stage, an accident or genetic engineering, or there are also a million ways how that can go wrong.
Yeah. And I think there's this, we talked about regulation, how regulation became so much deeper just in our lifetime, especially when it comes to tech. I think there are whole populations that are just afraid of what the future can bring. And all they try to do is to preserve the status quo in every sense, when it comes to political systems, technology, how economics work, everything. It's just about maintaining this perceived safe status quo. But none of that actually prevents the future. It doesn't prevent change. The only thing it does is that it shifts all the development to the bad actors, because they don't care. They break the law. And they don't think about consequences and stuff like that. And in a way, it creates this tension between what can be done by bad actors and this kindergarten preservation project that the main population has. And sooner or later, that tension will break. And then the main population is not prepared at all. Then it's going to be really bad. It's going to be the real bad uses of technology, people using technology, etc. And I think that we have to ease the tension. It's really important, especially hackers, crypto anarchists, etc. We're the ones that enjoy both the tension and the potential chaos and whatever, which puts us in this position to actually find out what a good way to the future could be. We can release a little bit of this tension. We can make it a little bit less dramatic.
Yeah, like what we talked about regarding the regulation of drones in the US, I think is a good example here. That, like you said, they want to make every drone trackable, and it's not going to be far from there until they say, okay, you have like these no-fly zones, and they have to be remote disabled.
Well, the remote disabled is already there.
Okay.
So the rule says that the software may not allow the drone to operate if the tracking provider is offline. So you just switch off the network to the tracking provider, and all the drones, the legal drones, are grounded.
But I think it is exactly what you said. they kind of try to, it looks like they try to preserve the status quo, which is a world without drones, which is a quote safer. But it will mean that you will have all the government drones and you will have all the big corporation drones because they can actually, afford the regulation.
Yeah.
And Amazon will ship stuff with drones, and there will be very little hobbyist stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's basically too expensive or outregulated. And well, if I would want to build like a technological totalitarian system, drones are, it's perfect for that.
Yeah.
You can surveil the entire city. You can combine it with face recognition. You can enforce all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Like a curtain,
Yeah.
Everything. You can even, kill people with it. It's very, very easy, everything. And, there's no counterbalance there. Like you said, there's nothing relieving the pressure.
Yeah. And I think this is true for almost all areas of society, politics, life today. It's this tension between trying to conserve stuff, which really means making the stuff be controlled by big organizations and the state, and just, trying to put everybody into those boxes of life. You can do this, but don't think for yourself. Don't experiment for yourself. And this not just empowers these big people, the potential big organizations that can get out of control, but it also empowers the evil people that don't care about the regulation and have evil intent. Because it means that the brain power of the masses never actually deals with the problem. The whole how to deal with drones, how to deal with this tech, or this change in communication, or this change in society, it's all outsourced. Nobody is challenged to think about it and experiment with it. It's all outsourced to a few masters that, I know a lot of these people. They are exactly as stupid as I am. They're not qualified more than I am. And like the next guy and the next guy. And because we have this regulatory prison, the real guys that should deal with the problem are never found. Because the current experts are not the people that should do it. I'm not the person that should do it. We don't even know the person that has the right idea. But if we lock him into a little prison, we'll never know what that idea is, how to progress.
And I've seen that in my professional life a lot already, that a lot of business, like free market in quotes business these days, is basically just dealing with regulation.
Yeah.
It's not about like, how can I build this the best way? It's about, okay, how can I build something going roughly in the direction I want to go while following all the regulations? Yeah. And then 90% of all the brain power is spent on, following the regulations. And also often that's where why you need a very high cost to actually do something.
And it leaves the real problems unsolved.
Yeah. Because once you dealt with all the regulation and spend all the money on that, you don't have any time or money left to actually innovate. You're happy that you got it somewhat running in the first place. Yeah.
And then you basically get competition between environments that are highly regulated and those that are less regulated. And at least currently, the trend is that the less regulated environments are the ones that are potentially dangerous, like China. Do you really want a world where China has the technological dominance? I don't.
No, I don't want to have that either.
Not a great idea. And I don't want to have a world that is dominated by the US either, just to make that clear, or Russia or whatever. But in a way, we have this ongoing lawfare that I really think it's going to blow up. And it's not going to be nice. We have to understand tech and changes ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't rely just on the big boss. Because they have their own interests. They're captured in their own worldviews. It won't work.
Yeah, and it creates this complexities which lead to systemic risk, because that's what they're usually not thinking about, that they're creating this systemic risk. Like, for example, with trying to ban cash.
Yeah.
It's
great example.
We just had it here in Germany one day before Christmas for a few hours. A lot of stores, the electronic payment systems, they didn't work, which was a huge problem, of course, for both the shop owners and the Christmas shoppers.
And the banks, because the ATMs actually ran dry.
Of course, yeah. They're not used to that amount of demand. But that, I think, it's a good example where you create these couple systems, and then when one component doesn't work, the entire system stops working because it's too tightly coupled, and you have the systemic risk people usually don't see.
Okay, that was a dark note, man.
What?
That was too dark.
It was too dark.
Do we have any good news?
Well, we can talk about more OPSEC stuff in the physical space.
That is good. Yeah, that's a good point. Shall I start?
Please.
So, there's this issue with the physical space that security there works a little bit different than in a digital space, but there's also an overlap between the two. So, just as a warning, if you're in a non-nice environment and you have to deal with dead drops or drones or couriers or whatever, rule number 1, all electronic devices that you carry should be off. Only switch on what you really need, like the GPS, handheld GPS receiver. Don't have your laptop on, don't have your smartphone on. Don't wear a Fitbit, don't wear an Apple Watch, all these things basically not just spy on you, but they're potentially identifiable if the packet you're receiving is a poisonous pill. So tracking devices and SIGINT devices are very cheap and very small. So it's the same thing when you receive a letter from a provider. You should never take this letter home. If you did all the good steps of saying, okay, I'll have a letterbox somewhere else, I gotta pick up the stuff and then go home. Never take the letter home before unpacking it. Go to a place where you have some amount of privacy. Unpack the thing. Only take the stuff out of it that really matters for you. Throw everything else away. If you are unable to do that, the right way to go is to take the whole thing, put it into a Faraday bag. There are those bags that have a metal fabric that prevents electromagnetic radiation to come in and out. It means that there's no signal coming in and out. There's no GPS coming in. There's no LTE coming out, stuff like that. And that prevents that trackers, surveillance devices are disabled. And an important thing there is, it's not just about the tracker that has the location, but it's really simple today to build these little SIGINT devices that as soon as you open the package, they just scan for every other device around them. They enumerate Bluetooth devices, Wi-Fi devices, they collect MAC addresses, etc. Takes a second or two, and then they burst it out through mobile network. And then you're doomed. You're identified. Also, always be aware that not everybody is good. You should be aware that people send around stuff to harm you. Especially if they're anonymous, there's potential for harm. Test your substances. If it's bigger packages and it's a risky situation, double check everything.
These Faraday bags are also very useful to put your own devices into them once you switch them off, because you can often never be sure that they're really off. So it's good to put them in a Faraday bag. It
belongs into the carry-on gear of every crypto-anarchist.
Maybe we should create some.
The crypto-anarchist everyday carry.
Everyday carry, and then the bug out bag with the GPS
jammer.
No, the position finder, so you can find your caches. Sure. Yeah, like bootstrapping from your caches.
That's an interesting thing. We thought about having the prepper episode one day.
Yeah.
So maybe we have a prepper and crypto anarchist everyday carry episode somewhere in the future.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Do you have more on the OPSEC side?
When you're sending, the standard stuff, gloves, etc. Also, when it comes to second devices, there are those very cheap, very portable cameras that can be attached to a parcel. If you open it, they make a screenshot or a mugshot and can transmit it. So having some form of mask that you can put over your device while opening a parcel, that's a good idea.
Good point. Just going back to the dystopian future a little bit. I just remembered, I think we talked about this shortly, this drone story from China where the criminal gangs use drones to infect pigs from farmers.
Yes.
And then I think then they could blackmail them or buy them cheaper and sell them.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good example of, first of all, of course, cyberpunk is fuck, but second of all, this is what happens when evil people use this technology.
Yes.
For malicious purposes. And no
regulation stops that.
No. There's no way.
No way.
Yeah, I think you got any more stuff or?
No, I'm done and spent for today.
Yeah, me too. So,
let's thank our audience.
Yeah. So, like always, we would like to thank all our listeners who wrote us. We read every single email.
We do. And we print some of them out. Imagine that.
Yeah, all the links they sent us. There were some good articles in there. So even if we don't answer any email, we're really happy that we receive them.
And thank you for all those people that sent in questions for this episode. We asked on Twitter if you have any specific questions. I think we answered all of them during this episode.
Yeah, I checked them off, so we should have covered them all.
Awesome.
And since we talked about physical stuff in this episode, we also decided that we will start Postbox so that you not only can send us emails and Bitcoin donations, but you can also send us letters, and we also take your dirty fiat in the mail. So you
don't want your fiat anymore, we can keep it for you.
Keep the crypto and send us the dirty fiat. You can write us at Bitstream, Scanbox, hashtag 06965 Ehrenbergstraße, 16A, in 10245 Berlin, Germany.
The address is also in the show notes.
Yes, of course. We'll put it on the website. We would be really happy to receive some mail. You can send us from all over the world. As we discussed in the episode, you will be anonymous as a sender. Which also brings me to one remark we got, why we don't have a BTC Pay server for our donations.
That's really simple, because we actually want transparency for our donations where that is possible. So we kind of want that people can see how many donations we get, how much money we get. That's one thing. The other thing is your anonymity as a sender depends a lot on what you do, not on what the recipient does. So if you want to send us Bitcoin, you can send us Bitcoin to a static address without a problem if you actually know how to use Bitcoin anonymously. If you don't, then changing its recipient address doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, you always for your anonymity, you as the sender are responsible. So if you launder your Bitcoin correctly, then that's not a problem, I believe. And that brings me to the donations. Like I said, many thanks. As always, I will report the donations in the currency we got the most donations in, which is again Bitcoin. So
we're Bitcoin supporters and fans. You can buy our loyalty.
Yes. So thank you very much for 9.56 millibitcoin of Bitcoin, and also 3.79 millibitcoin of Decred, and 1.67 millibitcoin of Monero, and 1.52 millibitcoin of Bitcoin Cash.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again. And as always, we kind of, after deducting our costs, we calculate how much percent that is of the German minimum wage. So we're really happy that we increased our salary to 72% of the minimum wage. So maybe we can actually
reach 100%.
100%. It's just the beginning of the year. Maybe it was just a Christmas present, but maybe we'll get there.
Get us out of the crypto-anarchistic precariat, please.
Yes. And please send us some fan mail.
Yes.
No contraband. Fan mail, cash in the mail, nudes are okay too, but no contraband.
We like books as well.
Books would be great.
You get the nudes, I get the books.
Well, it depends. All right. So thank you for listening and hope to talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.